Austria's human story begins in the Paleolithic era, with the earliest evidence dating to the Middle Paleolithic period. The Repulust cave near Pegau, Styria, contains the oldest confirmed traces of human presence in Austria, potentially exceeding 250,000 years in age. These simple stone and bone tools alongside animal remains provide a glimpse into early hominin life. The Goodness Cave in Lower Austria offers additional evidence from approximately 70,000 years ago. The Upper Paleolithic period, 50,000–10,000 BC, yielded more abundant archaeological material, particularly in Lower Austria's Wachau region. This area produced Austria's oldest known artworks, including the remarkable Venus figurines. The Venus of Galgenberg, 32,000 years old. Discovered near Stratzing, the world-famous Venus of Willendorf, 26,000 years old. These figurines demonstrate the sophisticated artistic capabilities of Upper Paleolithic peoples. Another significant discovery from the Gravettian culture is the 27,000-year-old double infant burial at Kremswachtberg, representing Austria's oldest known burial site. Mesolithic era, c. 10,000 to 500 BC. Following the retreat of glaciers, the Mesolithic period marked a transition in human adaptation. Evidence from this era includes artifacts found in rock shelters, abris near Lake Constance and the Alpine Rhine Valley. Microlithic tools and a burial site at Elsbethen indicate adaptations to the changing post-glacial environment. The Mesolithic represents a crucial shift from purely hunter-gatherer lifestyles toward more settled existence. During this period, human societies became less nomadic due to improved hunting and fishing techniques and the abundance of food sources following the Ice Age. While still primarily hunter-gatherers, people began utilizing multiple familiar sites for living, suggesting a more settled lifestyle. Neolithic era, 5500–2200 BC. The Neolithic Revolution brought profound changes with the arrival of farming. The linear pottery culture, LBK, one of Europe's earliest agrarian societies, established settlements in areas suitable for agriculture. The site at Brunn am Gebirge stands as the first documented rural settlement from this period in Austria, dating to around the middle of the 6th millennium BC. This era also saw the beginnings of resource exploitation, evidenced by Austria's first known industrial site, the Neolithic chert mine at Mauer Antonscheuer in Vienna, which was crucial for tool production. Later in the Neolithic, the Lengyel culture succeeded the LBK in Lower Austria, introducing characteristic circular ditch enclosures, Kreisgrabenanlagen, suggesting evolving social organization and potentially defensive needs. A particularly significant development in Neolithic Austria was the establishment of lake dwellings. Nearly 30 waterlogged lacustrine sites are known from Austria, primarily associated with the Mondsee culture. These pile-dwelling settlements built over alpine lakes offered excellent preservation of organic materials, providing exceptional insights into prehistoric life. The waterlogged conditions preserved organic materials that would otherwise have decomposed, enabling archaeologists to gain a deeper understanding of socio-economic and ecological conditions of the time. Copper Age, Chalcolithic, c. 4500 to 2200 BC. The Copper Age saw the first widespread use of metal in Austria. Traces of this period include the hoard found at Stolhof, Hohewand, Lower Austria. Hilltop settlements became more common, particularly in eastern Austria, suggesting developing social hierarchies and defensive strategies. People began systematically seeking and exploiting copper ore deposits within the central alpine regions during this period. The most famous individual from this era is Otzi the Iceman, a remarkably preserved mummy found frozen in the Ötztal Alps around 3300 BC, though his discovery site is now just across the border in Italy. The Mondsee group represents another significant cultural manifestation of this period, known for its distinctive pottery and pile-dwelling settlements built over alpine lakes. These settlements have yielded exceptionally well-preserved artifacts due to the waterlogged conditions. Archaeological significance. The prehistoric sites of Austria provide crucial evidence for understanding early human development in Central Europe. The exceptional preservation conditions at waterlogged sites, particularly the lake dwellings, offer rare insights into prehistoric life that aren't available at most archaeological sites. These settlements are now recognized as part of the prehistoric pile dwellings around the Alps, UNESCO World Heritage Site, acknowledging their international significance. The transition from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled agricultural communities in Austria followed patterns similar to other parts of Europe, but with distinctive regional characteristics shaped by the alpine landscape. This foundation would eventually lead to the development of more complex societies in the Bronze and Iron Ages, setting the stage for Austria's later historical developments. Bronze Age, Austria, c. 2200 to 800 BC. The Bronze Age in Austria marked a period of significant technological advancement, social complexity, and cultural development. This era witnessed the emergence of sophisticated metallurgical techniques and extensive trade networks that transformed Austrian society. Early Bronze Age developments. The transition from the Copper Age to the Bronze Age around 2200 BC brought significant changes to Austrian settlements. Early in this period, fortified settlements emerged across the landscape, likely protecting centers involved in the mining, processing, and trading of copper and tin, essential components for bronze production. Archaeological evidence from sites like Pitten and Nussdorf ob der Traisen in Lower Austria reveals the increasing social stratification of Bronze Age society. The richness of grave goods found at these locations indicates the emergence of an elite class with access to valuable resources and trade connections. These burial sites contain bronze weapons, ornate jewelry, and pottery that demonstrate both technological skill and artistic sophistication. Urnfield culture, c. 1300 to 800 BC. The late Bronze Age in Austria is characterized by the Urnfield culture, named for its distinctive burial practice of cremating the dead and placing their ashes in urns within large cemeteries. This cultural shift represents not only changes in religious beliefs but also in social organization. According to the Naturhistorisches Museum Wien, the Urnfield culture saw the development of more complex settlement patterns, with some sites showing evidence of hierarchical organization and specialized craft production. Salt mining, the foundation of Bronze Age prosperity. Perhaps the most significant development during the late Bronze Age was the beginning of large-scale salt mining, particularly at Hallstatt in the Salzkammergut region. This exploitation of white gold laid the foundation for the wealth and cultural prominence that would continue into the subsequent Iron Age. The salt mines at Hallstatt were extensively worked with peak activity from the 8th to 5th centuries BC. As noted by the Salzwelten-Hallstatt Museum, organized salt mining began in Hallstatt in the Salzkammergut region in the Bronze Age between 2100 and 800 BC. The exceptional preservation conditions in the salt mines have provided archaeologists with remarkable insights into Bronze Age technology and daily life. The salt has preserved organic materials such as textiles, wood, and leather, along with tools including miners' backpacks and equipment. These finds reveal sophisticated mining techniques and specialized labor organization. Archaeological significance. The Bronze Age. Mining operations at Hallstatt were so significant that they would eventually give their name to an entire archaeological culture. Hallstatt site in the Upper Austrian Salzkammergut region where objects characteristic of the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age from c. 1100 BC were first identified. Excavations at Hallstatt have uncovered more than 2,000 graves with fine artifacts, indicating a prosperous community. The cemetery contains burials with varying degrees of wealth, suggesting a stratified society where control of salt production created economic power. Trade networks and cultural exchange. Bronze Age. Austrian communities participated in extensive trade networks that connected them with other European regions and even Mediterranean cultures. The need for tin, which is not naturally abundant in Austria, necessitated long-distance trade relationships. These trade connections facilitated not only the exchange of raw materials, but also the spread of technological innovations and cultural influences. The stylistic elements found in Bronze Age Austrian metalwork and pottery show influences from neighboring regions while maintaining distinctive local characteristics. Legacy: the Bronze Age laid crucial foundations for Austrian cultural development. The technological expertise in metallurgy, the social stratification, and the trade networks established during this period created the conditions for the even more complex societies that would emerge in the subsequent Hallstatt Iron Age. The exploitation of salt resources at Hallstatt would continue to be economically significant for centuries, making this site one of the most important prehistoric industrial centers in Europe. The Hallstatt culture and early Celts, c. 800–400 BC, origins and development. The dawn of the Iron Age in Austria is synonymous with the rise of the Hallstatt culture, which emerged around 800 BC from the preceding late Bronze Age Urnfield traditions. Named after the iconic type site in Upper Austria, this culture represents the earliest phase of Celtic civilization in Europe. As noted by the World History Encyclopedia, the Hallstatt culture is named after the site of that name in Austria, and it flourished in Central Europe from the 8th to 6th century BC. The full period of its presence extends from CR 1200 to c. 450 BC, from the Late Bronze Age to the Early Iron Age. The Hallstatt period was significantly shaped by interactions with Mediterranean civilizations and peoples from the eastern steppes, creating a distinctive cultural identity that would lay the foundation for later Celtic developments. Geographic distribution and cultural zones. Archaeologists divide the Hallstatt culture into western and eastern zones, roughly separated by the Enns, Wybibs, and Inn rivers. By the 6th century BC, it had expanded to include wide territories, falling into two zones, east and west, between them covering much of western and central Europe down to the Alps and extending into northern Italy. The western zone maintained contacts with Greek colonies along the Ligurian coast and interacted with Etruscan and other Greek-influenced regions in Italy. The eastern zone shows closer links with nomadic groups migrating from the southern Russian steppes via the Carpathian Basin. This division reflects different external influences and trade connections that shaped regional variations within the broader Hallstatt cultural sphere. Salt mining, the foundation of Hallstatt prosperity. The settlement at Hallstatt itself provides a prime example of the culture's economic foundation. Its prosperity was built upon the intensive exploitation of vast natural salt deposits, the region's white gold. According to the Salzwelten Hallstatt Museum, the heyday of prehistoric mining was in the late Iron Age between 800 and 400 BC. At that time, miners would penetrate as much as 200 meters into the mountain. The salt mines at Hallstatt were exceptionally productive, with mine shafts reaching depths of 400 meters. This extensive mining operation allowed the local communities to export salt throughout Europe, establishing far-reaching trade networks. The salt trade, combined with Celtic control over trade routes along the river Danube, facilitated the development of a Celtic iron industry. Hallstatt iron plows, tools, and weapons gave them a technological advantage over the other barbarian tribes of Europe during the Late Bronze Age and Early Iron Age. Archaeological evidence and material culture excavations at Hallstatt have yielded extraordinary archaeological evidence. Between 1846 and 1899, more than 2,000 graves were found, containing both cremated and inhumed remains. The majority fall into two groups, an earlier CE 1100 Marantau and 1000 to c. 800 to 700 BC, and a later c. 800 700 to 450 BC. Near the cemetery was a prehistoric salt mine. Because of the preservative nature of the salt, implements, parts of clothing, and even the bodies of the miners themselves have been discovered. The grave goods from Hallstatt reveal a wealthy elite with access to both local products and imported luxury items. These include iron and bronze weapons and tools, elaborate jewelry including torques, neck rings, and brooches, imported bronze and ceramic vessels from Mediterranean regions, textiles and leather goods preserved by the salt-ornate pottery, sometimes with polychrome decoration. The exceptional preservation conditions in the salt mines have provided archaeologists with rare insights into everyday life, including organic materials like textiles, wood, and leather, along with tools and equipment used by the miners. Trade networks and cultural exchange. The Hallstatt period was characterized by sophisticated trade networks facilitated by control over valuable resources like salt. These networks extended across Europe and into the Mediterranean world. The presence of imported goods in Hallstatt graves is material evidence of active trade with Mediterranean civilizations, especially with the Greek colony of Massalia, the Veneti of the northern Adriatic region, and the Etruscans in central and northern Italy. Imported luxury items found in Hallstatt graves include Greek and Etruscan bronze vessels, Mediterranean wine and oil containers, coral and amber ornaments, exotic foodstuffs. In exchange, the Hallstatt communities likely traded salt, iron, gold, animal pelts, and possibly slaves. These extensive trade connections not only brought material goods but also facilitated the exchange of ideas, technologies, and artistic influences that shaped Hallstatt cultural development. Social structure and settlement patterns. The Hallstatt culture exhibited increasing social stratification, with an emerging elite class of chieftains and warriors. Archaeological evidence from burials indicates significant wealth disparities, with some graves containing elaborate goods while others were more modest. Hallstatt communities typically lived in fortified hilltop settlements known as oppida, which provided defensive advantages and control over surrounding territories. While most settlements were relatively small, some larger centers developed around important resource sites like the salt mines at Hallstatt. Technological advancements. While bronze remained in use, iron technology became increasingly important during the Hallstatt period. The ability to work iron represented a significant technological leap, eventually leading to stronger tools and weapons. The established trade routes, initially focused on salt and copper, adapted to include iron and other goods, connecting alpine communities with diverse cultural spheres. Artistic expression and religious practices. Hallstatt art is characterized by geometric designs and stylized representations. Hallstatt art in general is severely geometric in style. The advances made were on technical rather than aesthetic lines. There is a general tendency toward the extravagant and the Baroque, and the Greek Orientalizing influence is hardly felt. Religious practices are evidenced by artifacts like the cult wagon of Stretweg from Styria, which offers insights into the cosmology and beliefs of the time. The careful burial practices and inclusion of grave goods suggest belief in an afterlife. Legacy and transition. The Hallstatt culture went into decline around 500 to 450 BC as local natural resources became depleted and rival trading centers emerged elsewhere. It was succeeded by the Latin culture, which represents the next phase of Celtic development in Europe. The cultural foundations established during the Hallstatt period, including social stratification, trade networks, technological expertise, and artistic traditions, provided the groundwork for the flourishing of Celtic civilization across Europe in subsequent centuries, making this Austrian-centered culture a crucial chapter in European prehistory. The cultural shift from Hallstatt to Latin around 450 BC, the Hallstatt culture gradually transitioned into what archaeologists call the Latinic culture, representing a significant evolution in Celtic civilization rather than an abrupt replacement. This transition occurred through a complex process of cultural evolution, external influences, and shifting trade networks. The Latin culture, CEO 450, C50 BC, is named after the site of that name on the northern shores of Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland. It replaced the earlier Hallstatt culture, C1200, C450 BC, as the dominant culture of Central Europe, especially in terms of art. The transition was characterized by several key developments. 1. Shift in power centers. Archaeological evidence suggests that by the early 5th century BC, centers of power and wealth had shifted from the Alpine regions to the Rhineland and Marne regions, possibly due to reoriented trade routes facilitating direct trading between Celtic peoples and the Etruscans. 2. Artistic innovation. Latin art developed a distinctive style characterized by curved geometric shapes, stylized human figures, vegetal designs, and fantastic creatures, showing influence from Greek and Etruscan artistic traditions while maintaining its own unique character. 3. Changes in burial practices. The four-wheeled wagons of Hallstatt elite burials were replaced by lighter two-wheeled chariots, and weapons became more abundant in graves, suggesting an increased emphasis on mobility and warfare. The formation of Noricum. One of the most significant developments during this period was the formation of Noricum, a Celtic kingdom or tribal confederation in what is now southern and eastern Austria. According to historical sources, Noricum comprised approximately 12 tribes led by the Norici. The kingdom of Noricum emerged as a powerful political entity with control over valuable resources, particularly high-quality iron ore. The Ferrum Noricum, Noric iron, became renowned throughout the Mediterranean world for its exceptional quality, establishing Noricum as an important trading partner with Rome and other Mediterranean powers. Celtic settlements and resource exploitation. Celtic settlements during the Latenna period continued to thrive on resource exploitation, establishing specialized production centers. 1. Salt mining at Dürnberg. After the decline of salt production at Hallstatt, Dürnberg near Hallein in Salzburg became a major center for salt mining. According to research on the Hallstatt-Laten transition, blurred ruptures, the Hallstatt-Laten transition at the Dürnberg indicates that this site shows continuity through the cultural transition period. 2. Iron production. In eastern Styria and Burgenland, e.g. Oberpullendorf, high-quality iron ore was extracted and expertly processed. The exceptional quality of Noric iron led to significant trade with Rome and other Mediterranean powers. 3. Oppida development. The first symptom of strained relations, most likely caused by increased competition for resources and trade opportunities, was the building of Oppida in the 2nd and 1st century BC. These fortified settlements served as political, economic, and social centers. Significant Oppida in Austria included Kulm in Styria, Idunum, modern Villach, Berg, Schwarzenbach, Braunsberg, Heinberg. Roman trade and influence. The Laten period saw increasing interaction with Rome, culminating in the establishment of a Roman trading post on the Magdalensberg, Carinthia, in the early 1st century BC. This trading post was a precursor to the later Roman city of Virunum and represented the growing economic ties between Celtic Noricum and Rome. The quality of Noric iron was particularly valued by the Romans, who established commercial relations with Noricum long before military conquest. This trade relationship was mutually beneficial, with Celtic elites gaining access to Roman luxury goods while Rome secured access to high-quality iron for weapons and tools. During this period, larger tribal groups consolidated, and the first historically recorded tribal names in the region appeared, including the Taurishki, the Ambidravi. The Ambisantes place names also began to appear in historical records, some of which continue to the present day. The origins of some modern Austrian cities, like Linz, can be traced back to settlements founded during this vibrant Celtic era. The Laten culture went into decline following the Roman expansion into Central Europe. While Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul, 5850 BC, is often cited as the end of Celtic independence in Western Europe, the Kingdom of Noricum maintained its independence somewhat longer through a client relationship with Rome Mauritius. However, in 15 BC, during the reign of Emperor Augustus, Noricum was formally annexed as a Roman province, ending the political independence of the Celtic tribes in what is now Austria. Despite this political change, many aspects of Celtic culture persisted in the hybrid Gallo-Roman culture that developed during the Roman period. The cultural legacy of the Latenna Celts in Austria remains evident in archaeological finds, place names, and certain cultural traditions that survived into the Roman period and beyond, representing an important chapter in Austria's rich cultural heritage. Noricum, the first Austrian state, Klart, 400 BC, 15 BC, origins and political formation. The Kingdom of Noricum represents the first organized political entity in what is now Austrian territory, emerging from the Laten cultural milieu around 400 BC. About 200 BC, under the leadership of the Norics, 13 tribes joined the Kingdom of Noricum. Thus, the Regnum Noricum was the first political state structure at all on Austrian soil. Archaeological evidence from the Magdalensberg, which later became the kingdom's capital, has revealed inscriptions naming 8 of these tribes: Ambidravi, Ambelinis, Ambitius, Helvetian, Helveti, Layankan, Noriker, Seivaten, and Uperaken. The Norati tribe, which gave its name to the kingdom, appears to have held a leadership position within this confederation. The kingdom encompassed a substantial area covering much of modern southern and eastern Austria, extending into parts of present-day Slovenia and Bavaria. Its borders were the Danube to the north, Rhaetia and Vindelici to the west, Pannonia to the east and southeast, and Italia, Venetia et Histria to the south. The political center of the kingdom was at Virunum on the Magdalensberg in Carinthia, where archaeological excavations have revealed a significant settlement that later became a Roman administrative center. Other important oppida, fortified settlements included Culm in Styria, Idunum, modern Villach, Berg, Schwarzenbach, Braunsberg, Heinberg. The economic power of Noricum was built primarily on its control of valuable natural resources, particularly high-quality iron ore. The Ferrum Noricum, Noric iron, became renowned throughout the Mediterranean world for its exceptional quality and was highly prized for weapons production. Archaeological research at Huttenberg in Austria has revealed extensive evidence of large-scale iron production. According to academic research, the production of Ferrum Noricum at Huttenberg, Austria, the results of archaeological excavations carried out from 2003 to 2010 at the site Semlach, Eisner, demonstrate the sophisticated metallurgical knowledge of the Norican people. The kingdom's prosperity was also based on salt mining, continuing the tradition from Hallstatt, agriculture and cattle breeding, control of important trade routes across the Alps. The relationship between Noricum and Rome was characterized by mutual benefit rather than conquest. Around 170 BC, a formal diplomatic relationship was established. As Titus Livius relates, a Roman legation was negotiating with the tribal alliance. From this time, King Sincibulus was in a friendly relationship with the Romans through a hospitium publicum, state hospitality. This hospitium publicum was a formal treaty of friendship and mutual hospitality, which granted special privileges to both parties. For Noricum, it provided protection against external threats, privileged trading status with Rome, recognition as a sovereign ally. For Rome, the benefits included nawatiu, access to the high-quality Noric iron essential for Roman weaponry, a stable buffer state on its northeastern frontier, control of important Alpine trade routes. This mutually beneficial relationship was demonstrated in 113 BC when Rome sent an army under Gnaeus Papirius Carbo to defend Noricum against invading Germanic tribes, although this intervention ended in a Roman defeat. The economic ties between Noricum and Rome intensified with the establishment of a Roman trading post at the Magdalensberg in the first half of the 1st century BC. Archaeological evidence from this site reveals extensive commercial activity, with inscriptions documenting transactions between Roman merchants and local producers. According to academic research on Norican steel, the trading post facilitated the export of iron products to Roman territories, particularly to Aquileia, which served as the main distribution center for Noricon goods entering Italy. The archaeological finds at Magdalensberg include writing tablets recording commercial transactions, demonstrating the sophisticated nature of this trade relationship. While historical sources on Norican leadership are limited, several kings are mentioned in classical texts. 1. Sincibulus, c. 170 BC, established the formal hospitium publicum relationship with Rome. 2. Voccio, mid-1st century BC, known for his diplomatic marriages, including giving his sister in marriage to the Germanic leader Ariovistus. According to Alaturca, Voccio provided Caesar with 300 riders for the fight during the Gallic Wars, demonstrating the military alliance between Noricum and Rome. The political structure appears to have been a form of elective monarchy or aristocratic confederation, with leadership centered on the Norati tribe but incorporating representatives from the other tribal groups. Integration into the Roman Empire. The independent kingdom of Noricum came to an end in 15 BC when it was incorporated into the Roman Empire. Noricum was annexed by Rome, apparently as a bloodless conquest, about 15 BC. This annexation occurred as part of Emperor Augustus's broader strategy to secure the Alpine frontiers. Unlike many other regions, the incorporation of Noricum appears to have been largely peaceful, likely reflecting the long-standing friendly relations between the kingdom and Rome. Initially, Noricum retained some autonomy as a client kingdom, but under Emperor Claudius, 41 to 54 AD, it was fully organized as a Roman province governed by an equestrian procurator. The transition was facilitated by the already high level of Romanization among the Norican elite, who had adopted many aspects of Roman culture and economic practices through their long-standing trade connections. The Kingdom of Noricum represents a crucial chapter in Austrian history as the first organized state in the region. Its legacy includes 1. Economic innovation, the development of advanced metallurgical techniques that made Norican steel famous throughout the ancient world. 2. Urban foundations. Many modern Austrian cities trace their origins to Norican settlements that later developed into Roman towns. 3. Cultural synthesis. Noricum demonstrated a successful blending of Celtic traditions with Mediterranean influences, creating a distinctive regional culture. 4. Political precedent. As the first state entity in Austrian territory, Noricum established a tradition of regional political organization that would influence later developments. The peaceful transition from Celtic kingdom to Roman province also established a pattern of cultural adaptation and integration that would characterize much of Austrian history, as the region repeatedly absorbed and transformed external influences while maintaining its distinctive identity. Establishment of provinces and administrative structure. Following the peaceful integration of the Kingdom of Noricum around 15 BC, the territory of modern Austria was incorporated into the Roman Empire as part of Emperor Augustus' strategy to secure the Alpine frontiers. This territory was primarily divided among 3 Roman provinces: Noricum, the core region of modern Austria, roughly extending from the Danube River in the north to the Alpine crest in the south, and from the Inn River in the west to the Vienna Woods in the east. Noricum was originally a kingdom controlled by a Celtic confederacy that dominated an earlier Illyrian population before becoming a Roman province. Pannonia. The eastern regions of modern Austria, primarily Burgenland, were incorporated into this large province, with Carnuntum serving as its most important settlement in the Austrian territory. Rhaetia. The westernmost parts of modern Austria, Tyrol and Vorarlberg, belonged to this province. A significant administrative reorganization occurred under Emperor Diocletian, 284–305 AD, who divided Noricum along the main Alpine ridge into Gau, Noricum Ripense, northern part along the Danube, Noricum Mediterraneum, southern, more mountainous region. During the administrative reforms under Diocletian, Verunum became the capital of the new province of Noricum Mediterraneum, seat of the civilian governor, Prices. Roman rule brought unprecedented urbanization to the region, establishing numerous towns and military camps that form the foundation for many modern Austrian cities. Key urban centers: 1. Vindobona, Vienna, originally established as a military camp around 100 AD, as evidenced by building inscriptions dating from 103 AD. Around 1 AD, the Kingdom of Noricum was included in the Roman Empire. Henceforth, the Danube marked the border of the empire, and the Romans built fortifications and settlements on the banks of the Danube, including Vindobona, with an estimated population between 15,000 to 20,000 people. Carnuntum, near Petronell Carnuntum, the largest Roman settlement in Austria and capital of Pannonia Superior. Archaeological excavations have revealed an extensive urban complex with an amphitheater, forum, and baths. It also became a large city of approximately 50,000 inhabitants. Verunum, near Klagenfurt, the capital of Noricum Mediterraneum, situated on the Zollfeld plain. The high cultural level of the town, which surpassed all other municipia of Noricum. Lauriacum, Enns, a significant military base and later provincial capital of Noricum Ripense. The geopolitical significance of the place is characterized by its location: A. On the important Danube road parallel to the Noric-Pannonic limes, B. At the terminal of the Noric Transalpine road leading from the Adriatic area, Aquileia, via Verunum Ovilava to the Danube. Juvavum, Salzburg, an important commercial center that grew from Celtic roots into a significant Roman town. Tyrnia, near Spital an der Drau, a major administrative center in southern Noricum, located 4 km W of Spital on the Drau, on the Roman road Virunum Aguntum Brenner, where this intersected with the road to Juvavum. Aguntum, near Lienz, a prosperous trading center in East Tyrol. Recent archaeological research has revealed its importance in trade networks. These findings offer insights into an extensive trade network, showcasing Aguntum as the sole known Roman hub for this coveted high-value resource material that were highly desired in ancient times. Infrastructure development. The Romans constructed an extensive network of roads connecting these urban centers, facilitating military movement, trade, and communication. Major routes included 1. The Danube-Limes Road, connecting frontier forts from Vindobona to Carnuntum and beyond. 2. The north-south route from Aquileia to the Danube via Virunum. 3. The east-west Alpine route connecting Aguntum, Tyrnia, and Virunum. Under Emperor Augustus, the Roman Danubian provinces of Rhaetia, Noricum, and Pannonia were established shortly after the birth of Christ. Rhaetia comprised Upper and Lower Bavaria, Noricum, the area of present-day Austria south of the Danubius. The Inn River formed the inner Roman customs border between these two provinces. The Romans also developed sophisticated water management systems. In Vindobona, for example, archaeological excavations have revealed that Vindobona received its supply through a 17-kilometer-long water pipeline. The source is in the Vienna woods around today's Kalksburg. The Danube River served as the northern frontier of the Roman Empire in this region, fortified by the Danubian limes, a system of forts, watchtowers, and roads. This defensive line protected Roman territory from Germanic tribes residing to the north. Major military installations along the limes included 1. Vindobona, home to the Legio ex Gemina from 114 AD until the 5th century. 2. Carnuntum, base of the Legio XIV, Gemina Martia Victrix. 3. Lauriacum, headquarters of the Legio II Italica from around 205 AD. Until the end of the Roman rule, the Legio II Italica remained as its garrison. The Roman period saw significant economic development in the region, building upon and expanding the resource exploitation that had begun during the Norican kingdom, mining and metallurgy. The Romans continued and expanded the mining of iron, copper, zinc, and gold. The famous Norican steel, Ferrum Noricum, remained an important export, agriculture. The introduction of Roman agricultural techniques and crops transformed farming in the region, with villa rustica estates developing around urban centers. Trade, the integration into the Roman economic system, facilitated trade, with luxury goods from the Mediterranean reaching even remote alpine valleys. Archaeological evidence from Aguntum shows it was a pivotal transshipment center where commerce and cultural exchange converged. Crafts and industry. Urban centers developed specialized craft production, including pottery, glassmaking, and textile manufacturing. Christianity in Roman Austria. Christianity began to spread in the Roman provinces of Austria during the 3rd century AD, becoming more established in the 4th century following Constantine's Edict of Milan 313 AD. Literature and finds give evidence of Christianity in Lauriacum in this same century. Florianus, the former head clerk of the chancery under the governor of Riparian Noricum, is a well-documented figure who died a martyr's death, the only one known in Austria Romana, during Diocletian's persecutions of the Christians circa 304 AD. Archaeological evidence of early Christianity includes 1. Early Christian churches. Archaeological excavations at Lauriacum were used to open walls of Roman predecessors, dated from 180 AD. Also excavated was the first Christian church, 4th-5th century, and other church buildings from the first millennium. 2. Christian artifacts. A recent discovery at Irschen in southern Austria revealed a 1,500-year-old reliquary from a late antique hilltop settlement, with the remains of several dwellings, 2 Christian churches, a cistern, and numerous personal belongings. 3. Early bishoprics. Several Roman towns became seats of bishops, including Turnia and Aguntum. The Roman presence led to significant cultural changes. 1. Language. Latin became the language of administration and the elite, though Celtic languages likely persisted in rural areas. 2. Urban planning. Roman cities followed standardized layouts with forums, baths, and grid-pattern streets. The town plan indicates that the town was developed according to a Greco-Roman architectural plan. Its main feature is two axes at right angles with roads, up to 14.5 meters wide, crossing at right angles to form rectangular insulae. 3. Architecture and art. Roman architectural styles and artistic traditions were adopted, with local variations. Numerous marble statues, mostly two-thirds life-size, copies from Greek originals of classical times, also a statue of Isis Nerea, a national mother goddess, based on a classical prototype. 4. Religion. Traditional Roman deities were worshipped alongside local Celtic gods, often through syncretism, the merging of deities. From the late 4th century, Roman authority in the Danubian provinces began to weaken under increasing pressure from migrating people and internal instability within the empire. Germanic invasions, the Danubian limes faced repeated breaches. Carnuntum, for example, was destroyed by Germanic invaders, the Quadi and Iazyges, in 374 AD. Abandonment of settlements. Many Roman sites show evidence of decline or abandonment in the 5th century. Aguntum, for instance, shows a decline in activity and importance, with archaeological evidence indicating that by the 6th century CE, Aguntum is in ruins. The area now serves as burial grounds, suggesting a substantial abandonment of the settlement. Hunnic invasions. The arrival of the Huns in the 430 AD led to further destabilization. The population of Vindobona fled after the Huns invaded Pannonia in the 430 AD, and the settlement was abandoned for several centuries. Slavic and Bavarian settlement. By the 6th century, new people were moving into the former Roman territories. The archaeological site at Irschen shows that this abandonment coincided with the Battle of Aguntum, where Slavic forces defeated the local Germanic Bajuvari people, marking the end of the settlement's connection to the Mediterranean world and its Christian heritage. The end of direct Roman rule did not mean a complete cultural break. Christian institutions, particularly in the form of monasteries and bishoprics, provided continuity between the Roman and medieval periods. Some Roman settlements were eventually reoccupied and developed into medieval towns, while others were abandoned permanently, with their stones repurposed for new construction. The legacy of Roman rule in Austria remains visible in archaeological sites, urban layouts, place names, and cultural traditions that persisted long after the political structures of Rome had disappeared from the region. Migration period and early Middle Ages in Austria, 5th–10th century. The migration period marked a profound transformation in the Austrian lands following the collapse of Western Roman authority. This era, known as the Völkerwanderung, wandering of people, reshaped the ethnic, political, and cultural landscape of Central Europe between the 5th and 10th centuries. Invasions and settlements by various tribes. Archaeological and historical evidence confirms that the former Roman provinces of Noricum, Raetia, and Pannonia faced increasing pressure from migrating people even before Rome's final withdrawal. The Hunnic Empire under Attila, until 453, created massive population displacements across Europe. After the Huns' defeat at the Battle of Nidau, 454, numerous Germanic groups moved into the power vacuum. The Visigoths had already traversed Noricum en route to Italy in 408, while the Ostrogoths established dominance in Pannonia after 468. North of the Danube, tribes like the Rugi and Heruli created short-lived kingdoms. The life of Saint Severinus provides a rare contemporary account of this tumultuous period, describing the precarious existence of Romanized populations in Noricum Ripense during the final decades of Roman presence. Roman forces formally abandoned Noricum around 488, withdrawing remaining provincial populations to Italy under Odoacer's orders. This withdrawal created opportunities for new settlements, with the Alemanni occupying much of Raetia and the Lombards moving southward, defeating the Heruli around 508 before eventually conquering Italy in 568. Formation of the Bavarian and Slavic territories, particularly significant for Austria's development, was the emergence of two major ethnic groups that would shape its medieval landscape. The Bavarii, better known as Bavarians, began settling in the west, occupying former Rhaetian territories in parts of northern Noricum, roughly modern Bavaria, Upper Austria, Salzburg, and Tyrol. Recent genetic studies suggest they form from a mixture of Germanic groups and the remaining Romanized population, maintaining some continuity with late Roman culture while developing their own distinct identity. Slavic groups migrated westward into the Eastern Alps from the 6th century onward, settling in depopulated areas of southern Noricum and parts of Pannonia, modern Carinthia, Styria, Lower Austria, and Slovenia. Initially under Avar influence, these Alpine Slavs gradually consolidated their political identity, forming the Principality of Carantania in modern Carinthia by the 7th century, the first stable Slavic political entity in the region. Archaeological findings reveal that these neighboring populations maintained distinct cultural identities with limited genetic mixing, suggesting parallel rather than integrated communities during this period. Frankish conquest and the establishment of the Avar March. The rising Frankish kingdom under Charlemagne eventually confronted the Avar Khaganate, which had dominated the Pannonian Basin since the late 6th century. After decisive campaigns, 791 to 796, Charlemagne destroyed Avar power and established a series of border marches to secure his eastern frontier. The Avar March, a Warenmark, covering parts of modern Lower Austria between the Enns River and the Vienna Woods, served as a military border zone. According to contemporary sources, this administrative structure was designed to 1. Control newly conquered territories, 2. Defend against remaining Avar threats, 3. Manage relations with neighboring Slavic peoples, including Carantania. The Frankish administration initially allowed some Avar princes to maintain limited authority in eastern regions up to the Raba River, though under Frankish overlordship. By the 820s and 830s, these semi-autonomous Avar territories were fully incorporated into the Frankish system, and the Avars as a distinct group gradually disappeared from historical records. Christianization and Carolingian cultural influence. The integration of these regions into the Carolingian Empire accelerated Christianization efforts. Building upon remnants of Roman-era Christian structures, Frankish rulers supported missionary activities led by figures like Saint Rupert and Saint Virgil, who re-established the bishopric of Salzburg. This ecclesiastical center gained authority over Bavarian territories and missionary responsibility for Carantania. The Carolingian period fostered a complex cultural landscape where Roman traditions persisted in urban centers and ecclesiastical institutions. Germanic customs shaped legal and social structures. Slavic presence influenced language and local practices. Christian faith provided an overarching framework for cultural integration. This multicultural foundation, established during the migration period and early Middle Ages, would prove crucial for Austria's later development as a crossroads of European cultures. The Babenberg dynasty and the rise of Austria, 10th–13th century. The Babenberg dynasty played a pivotal role in establishing Austria as a distinct political entity within the Holy Roman Empire. Following the Magyar invasions and subsequent stabilization of the eastern frontier, this noble house laid the foundations for what would eventually become the Austrian state. Creation of the Margraviate of Austria in 976. After Emperor Otto's decisive victory over the Magyars at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, the eastern frontier required reorganization. In 976, Emperor Otto II appointed Leopold I, also known as Luitpold, circa 940–994, of the Babenberg family as Margrave of the re-established Eastern March, Marcha Orientalis. As the Habsburg website notes, in 976 the Eastern March was assigned to a certain Count Leopold from the Bavarian noble house of Babenberg, under whom the family's rule over the area began. Habsburger.net. Leopold I, known as the Illustrious, der Erlauchte, became the progenitor of the Austrian Babenberg dynasty that would rule for nearly 3 centuries. His origins remain somewhat disputed, with theories suggesting connections to either Duke Arnulf of Bavaria or Count Berthold of the Nordgau region. The first documented use of the name Österreichi, the old High German precursor to Österreich, Austria, appears in a charter from 996, referring to lands within the Margraviate. This document marks the formal beginning of Austria as a named political entity under Babenberg control. Territorial development under early Babenbergs. Leopold I's initial territory was modest, centered along the Danube Valley in what is now Lower Austria. According to historical records, his Margraviate originally coincided with the Wachau Valley, with its eastern boundary at the Traisen River near St. Pölten. With the Magyar threat diminished, Leopold focused on securing internal control, capturing the fortress at Melk in 984, which became his residence and the site of a monastery he founded. By 987, Leopold had extended his territory eastward to the Wienerwald, Vienna Woods, and by 991 further to the Fische River. This systematic expansion established a pattern that his successors would continue, gradually pushing Austria's boundaries eastward along the Danube. The early Babenbergs proved adept at consolidating power through strategic fortress construction and settlement promotion, establishment of monasteries as centers of learning and administration, careful political maneuvering within the Holy Roman Empire, gradual eastward expansion of territory from Margraviate to duchy. A significant transformation occurred in 1156 when Emperor Frederick the Barbarossa elevated Austria from a Margraviate to a duchy through the Privilegium Minus. This privilege was granted to Henry II Jasomirgott, ruled 1141–1177, who had previously been Duke of Bavaria but was forced to surrender that title to Henry the Lion of the Welf dynasty. As compensation, Austria became a duchy with special privileges. Hereditary succession, including through the female line, limited obligations to the emperor, significant judicial autonomy under Henry II. Jasomirgott, Vienna became the permanent residence of the Babenberg rulers, laying the foundation for its future role as the capital. He established his court at Amhof and initiated the construction of St. Stephen's Church, which would later become Vienna's cathedral. Territorial expansion and the height of Babenberg power. The Babenbergs continued to expand their territories through strategic marriages, inheritance, and military campaigns. A major acquisition occurred in 1192 when, through the Georgenberg Pact Inheritance Treaty, Duke Leopold V, ruled 1177 to 1194, acquired the neighboring Duchy of Styria after the extinction of the Ottokar dynasty. Leopold V also gained international prominence and wealth when he captured the English King Richard the Lionheart on his return from the Third Crusade in 1192 and held him for ransom. With this wealth, Leopold further strengthened his position and territories. The zenith of Babenberg power came under Leopold VI the Glorious, ruled 1198–1230, who promoted urban development and trade, supported religious institutions and the arts, participated in crusades, enhancing Austria's international standing, maintained a sophisticated court culture under the Babenbergs. Austria transformed from a frontier march to a prosperous, culturally rich duchy at the crossroads of European trade routes. Their careful management of resources, strategic marriages, and diplomatic skill established Austria as a significant power within the Holy Roman Empire, setting the stage for the later Habsburg era. The elevation of Austria to a duchy and the Babenberg cultural legacy, the transformation of Austria from a frontier march to an independent duchy, represents one of the most significant developments in Central European medieval history. The Privilegium Minus, Latin for lesser privilege, issued by Emperor Frederick the Barbarossa on September 17, 1156, fundamentally altered Austria's status within the Holy Roman Empire. The document emerged from complex political maneuvering between the two most powerful German noble houses of the period, the Welfs and the Hohenstaufens. After the death of Henry the Proud, there had been concessions and reconciliations with regard to Bavaria. Frederick Barbarossa in 1156, intent on the Italian expedition, sought to resolve this dispute. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa needed to balance competing interests. Restoring Bavaria to Henry the Lion of the Welf family to secure his support, compensating Henry II Jasomirgott of the Babenberg family for his loss of Bavaria, strengthening imperial authority through a restructured feudal hierarchy. The solution was ingenious, elevating Austria from a margraviate to a duchy with unprecedented privileges. The Privilegium Minus contained several extraordinary provisions that distinguished Austria from other imperial territories. Hereditary succession through both male and female lines, a rarity in feudal law, libertas affectandi, the right of the duke to designate a successor in the absence of children, limited imperial obligations, Austrian dukes only needed to attend imperial diets held in Bavaria, restricted military service. Austria was only required to provide troops for campaigns in neighboring regions, enhanced internal sovereignty. No one could exercise jurisdiction within Austria without the Duke's consent. The Privilegium Minus laid the foundation for Austria's exceptional position within the Holy Roman Empire. Henry II Jasomirgott increased the dynasty's power in Austria by obtaining the Privilegium Minus when Austria was raised to a duchy. This document's importance extends beyond its immediate context. Thus, it established Austria's legal independence from Bavaria. It created the constitutional basis for Austria's later rise to power. It represents the first formal recognition of Austria as a distinct political entity. It initiated a process that would eventually lead to Austria becoming a major European power. The elevation to ducal status coincided with a period of remarkable cultural and economic development under Babenberg rule. Henry II. Jasomirgott made a crucial decision to establish Vienna as his permanent residence. Before the reign of Henry II Jasomirgott, the city of Vienna had no more importance than other neighboring Austrian towns on the Danube, Krems, Melk, and Klosterneuburg. His decision to move the ducal seat to Vienna in the mid-12th century laid the groundwork for the city's future prominence. He established his court at Am Hof and initiated construction of St. Stephen's Church, which would later become Vienna's cathedral. The Babenbergs were significant patrons of religious institutions, establishing monasteries that became centers of learning, art, and architecture. Melk Abbey, originally established by Leopold I, later expanded. Klosterneuburg Monastery, founded by Margrave Leopold III, later canonized. Heiligenkreuz Abbey, founded in 1133, one of the oldest continuously occupied Cistercian monasteries. Lilienfeld Abbey, founded by Duke Leopold VI in 1202. These institutions preserved classical knowledge, developed Romanesque and early Gothic architectural styles, and produced illuminated manuscripts of exceptional quality. Under Babenberg rule, Austria experienced significant economic growth. Expansion of viticulture along the Danube Valley, development of salt mining in the Alpine regions, growth of urban centers and trade routes, establishment of markets and minting privileges. The Danube River became an increasingly important trade route, connecting the Babenberg territories to both Western Europe and the Byzantine world. The Babenberg court, particularly under Leopold VI the Glorious, 1198-1230, became a renowned center of chivalric culture and minnesang, courtly love poetry. The famous poet Walter von der Vogelweide was among those who found patronage at the Babenberg court. The cultural and political foundations established during the Babenberg period created the essential framework upon which later Austrian history would build, setting the stage for the Habsburg era that would follow after the dynasty's extinction in 1246. The Habsburg ascendancy, from battlefield victory to European dynasty. The Habsburg dynasty's rise from modest Swiss nobility to European dominance began with Rudolf III's unexpected election as King of the Romans in 1273. This pivotal moment ended the tumultuous Great Interregnum period that had destabilized the Holy Roman Empire since 1250. Rudolph's election represented a calculated choice by the prince-electors who, according to historical research, sought a candidate they perceived as manageable, rather than a powerful ruler who might threaten their autonomy. As noted by historian Rinus van Hagen, Rudolf's ascension to power in 1273 ended the Great Interregnum, a period of political instability that followed the death of Emperor Frederick II in 1250. Rudolf's most consequential achievement came in 1278 at the Battle on the Marchfeld near Dürnkrutt, where he confronted King Ottokar II of Bohemia, who controlled the former Babenberg territories of Austria, Styria, Carinthia, and Carniola. This conflict emerged because 1. Ottokar refused to recognize Rudolf's election as King II. Rudolf sought to reclaim imperial fiefs alienated during the Interregnum. 3. Control of the wealthy Austrian lands was strategically vital. With Hungarian allies, Rudolf decisively defeated Ottokar, who died in battle. This victory allowed Rudolf to invest his sons, Albert II and Rudolf II, with the duchies of Austria and Styria in 1282, establishing the Habsburg hereditary lands that would serve as their power base for centuries. Rudolf I of Germany marked a consequential turning point for the Habsburg family. In 1273, Rudolf was elected King of Germany, which was a major milestone for the Habsburg dynasty, Ariete. While the Habsburgs initially secured their position through military victory, their subsequent expansion relied primarily on strategic marriages, a policy so successful it inspired their famous motto, "Let others wage war, you, happy Austria, marry." Emperor Maximilian the Roers, 1459 to 1519, perfected this matrimonial strategy. His marriage to Mary of Burgundy in 1477 brought the wealthy Burgundian territories, including much of present-day Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, under Habsburg control. This union significantly expanded Habsburg wealth and territorial reach across Western Europe. Maximilian further secured Habsburg dominance by arranging the marriage of his son Philip the Handsome to Joanna of Castile, heiress to the Spanish throne. This union ultimately led to their grandson Charles V inheriting an unprecedented empire spanning Europe and the Americas. Maximilian I and his marriage to Mary of Burgundy in 1477 was a game-changer. This marriage brought the wealthy and strategically important territories of Burgundy under Habsburg control. Charles V, 1500 to 1558, inherited the most extensive European empire since Charlemagne, ruling territories across Europe, the Americas, and parts of Asia. His domains were so vast they inspired the famous description, "the empire on which the sun never sets." However, governing such an enormous realm proved challenging. Charles faced 1. Relentless wars with France and the Italian Wars. 2. Ottoman expansion into Europe. 3. The Protestant Reformation fracturing religious unity. 4. German princes seeking greater autonomy. Exhausted by these challenges, Charles abdicated in 1556, dividing his empire between his son Philip II, who received Spain, the Netherlands, and Spanish territories in Italy and the Americas, his brother Ferdinand I, who received the Austrian Habsburg lands and became Holy Roman Emperor. This division created the two main Habsburg branches, Spanish and Austrian, that would dominate European politics for generations. Beyond political power, the Habsburgs were significant cultural patrons. Maximilian the Red exemplified the Renaissance prince, supporting arts, sciences, and humanist scholarship. He commissioned elaborate artistic projects, including the famous Triumphal Arch and Triumphal Procession woodcuts by artists like Albrecht Dürer. The Habsburg courts, particularly in Vienna and Innsbruck, became vibrant cultural centers blending Gothic traditions with Renaissance innovations. Their patronage extended to architecture, with numerous castles, palaces, and churches constructed or renovated under their rule. The Habsburg legacy in Austria. The Habsburg acquisition of Austria transformed both the dynasty and the region. For Austria, Habsburg rule meant elevation from a frontier march to a Central European power, development of Vienna as a major cultural and political center, integration into a broader European network through dynastic connections, establishment of administrative and cultural institutions that would shape Austrian identity. For the Habsburgs, Austria provided a stable territorial base within the Holy Roman Empire, strategic position controlling key trade routes, resources to fund imperial ambitions, legitimacy as one of the empire's leading families. This mutually beneficial relationship would endure for over 600 years, making the Habsburg dynasty synonymous with Austrian history and identity until the empire's dissolution in 1918. The Habsburg ascendancy from the 13th to 16th centuries represents one of history's most remarkable dynastic success stories, transforming a minor Swiss noble family into Europe's dominant power through a combination of military victory, strategic marriages, and political acumen. The birth of the Austrian Empire, 1804. The Austrian Empire emerged during one of Europe's most tumultuous periods, directly in response to Napoleon Bonaparte's imperial ambitions. In May 1804, Napoleon proclaimed himself Emperor of the French, threatening the ancient order of European monarchy. Francis II, Holy Roman Emperor and ruler of the Habsburg hereditary lands, recognized the existential threat this posed to his authority and status. On August 11, 1804, Francis took the unprecedented step of proclaiming himself Francis I, Emperor of Austria. As Wikipedia notes, the empire was proclaimed by Francis II in 1804 in response to Napoleon's declaration of the First French Empire, unifying all Habsburg possessions under one central government. This new imperial title consolidated his diverse hereditary lands, including Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, Galicia, and parts of Italy, under a single imperial crown. This strategic move served multiple purposes. It preserved the Habsburg imperial status regardless of what happened to the Holy Roman Empire. It unified previously separate realms under centralized authority. It created a political entity that could better resist Napoleonic expansion. Francis's foresight proved prescient. Following Austria's crushing defeat at Austerlitz in December 1805, Napoleon forced the humiliating Treaty of Pressburg upon Francis, stripping him of significant territories. More devastating was Napoleon's creation of the Confederation of the Rhine in July 1806, when 16 German states formally seceded from the Holy Roman Empire and allied with France. On August 6, 1806, Francis formally abdicated as Holy Roman Emperor, dissolving the thousand-year-old institution. As the German History and Documents Archive explains, in 1804, Holy Roman Emperor Francis II also became Emperor Francis I of Austria. He held the two titles simultaneously until Napoleon declared the Holy Roman Empire dissolved in 1806. This abdication was not merely symbolic. It represented the end of the medieval political order in Central Europe and the beginning of a new era of nation-states and empires, military struggles, and diplomatic maneuvers. The early years of the Austrian Empire were marked by repeated military defeats. The Third Coalition against France ended disastrously with the Battle of Austerlitz in December 1805, where Napoleon decisively defeated the combined Austrian and Russian forces. The subsequent Treaty of Pressburg forced Austria to cede Venice, Dalmatia, and Tyrol. In 1809, Austria attempted to reverse these losses by declaring war while Napoleon was occupied in Spain. Initial Austrian successes under Archduke Charles were ultimately reversed, culminating in defeat at the Battle of Wagram. The Treaty of Schönbrunn that followed cost Austria additional territories and a massive war indemnity. As Britannica notes, when the Austrians took the field against the French in 1805, the army was still inadequately equipped, insufficiently trained, under strength, and indifferently led. In a remarkable turn of events, Emperor Francis was forced to give his daughter, Marie-Louise, in marriage to Napoleon in 1810. This humiliating alliance symbolized Austria's subordination to French power. The Austrian Empire continued fighting against Napoleon throughout the Napoleonic Wars, except for a brief period between 1809 and 1813, when Austria was first allied with Napoleon. The turn of fortunes. Austria's fortunes changed dramatically after Napoleon's disastrous Russian campaign of 1812. Under the guidance of Foreign Minister Clemens von Metternich, Austria initially maintained neutrality in early 1813 while building up its military strength. In August 1813, Austria joined the Sixth Coalition against France. The decisive Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, often called the Battle of Nations, saw Austrian forces play a crucial role in defeating Napoleon. The subsequent Allied invasion of France led to Napoleon's abdication in April 1814 and Austria's emergence as one of the victorious powers. The Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, The Congress of Vienna represented Austria's diplomatic triumph under Metternich's leadership. The Austrian Empire regained most of its lost territories and acquired new ones, including Lombardy, Venetia, and northern Italy. Vienna became the center of European diplomacy, with Metternich orchestrating a conservative international order designed to prevent future revolutions and maintain the balance of power. Austria and its allies emerged victorious in the war, leading to the Congress of Vienna, which reaffirmed the empire as one of the great powers of the 19th century. The Congress established the German Confederation, a loose association of 39 German states, with Austria as its president. This arrangement secured Austrian predominance in German affairs while preventing the rise of a unified German nation-state that might challenge Habsburg power. Domestic transformation during the Napoleonic era. Domestic transformation during the Napoleonic era, the Napoleonic Wars catalyzed significant internal changes within the Austrian Empire. The creation of the Austrian Empire accelerated administrative centralization, though Hungary maintained its separate constitutional status. The Kingdom of Hungary, as regnum independens, was administered by its own institutions separately from the rest of the empire. The enormous costs of the Napoleonic Wars strained Austrian finances to the breaking point. A series of paper money issues led to severe inflation, culminating in state bankruptcy in 1811. This financial crisis necessitated comprehensive fiscal reforms that would shape Austrian economic policy for decades. Austria's military defeats prompted significant reforms under Archduke Charles, including the creation of a militia Landwehr in 1808, improvements in officer training, and modernization of tactics and equipment. Legacy of the Napoleonic era for Austria. The Napoleonic period fundamentally transformed Austria's position in Europe. Political transformation. The dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire and creation of the Austrian Empire marked Austria's transition from a medieval to a modern state structure. Territorial consolidation. Despite losses, the Austrian Empire emerged with more coherent borders and a more centralized administration. Conservative ideology. The experience of revolutionary warfare reinforced Austria's commitment to political conservatism under Metternich's leadership. German question. Austria's relationship with the German states became increasingly complex, setting the stage for the Austrian-Prussian rivalry that would dominate 19th-century Central European politics. The Austrian Empire that emerged from the Napoleonic Wars was a more centralized, bureaucratic state than its predecessor, though still facing significant challenges from nationalism and liberalism that would culminate in the revolutions of 1848 and eventually lead to the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867. The War of the Third Coalition and Austerlitz. The newly proclaimed Austrian Empire faced its first major test in the War of the Third Coalition. This conflict demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of Austria's military position in Europe. The Austerlitz campaign, the Battle of Austerlitz, December 10, 1805, stands as one of the most decisive engagements of the Napoleonic Wars. As Britannica notes, Napoleon's 68,000 troops defeated almost 90,000 Russians and Austrians, nominally under General Mikhail Kutuzov, forcing Austria to make peace with France. The battle, often called the Battle of the Three Emperors, showcased Napoleon's tactical brilliance. He deliberately weakened his right flank to entice the Allies into attacking there, while secretly reinforcing it with Marshal Davout's corps. When the Allies took the bait and moved troops from their center to attack the French right, Napoleon struck at the weakened Allied center on the Pratzen Heights. With the Allied center demolished, the French swept through both flanks and routed the Allies, which enabled the French to capture thousands of prisoners. The casualties were staggering. While the French lost around 9,000 men, the Allies suffered 15,000, 16,000 killed or wounded and 12,000, 20,000 captured. The defeat was so devastating that Emperor Francis II met personally with Napoleon 2 days after the battle. A famous painting by Antoine-Jean Gros depicts this meeting, showing the humbled Austrian emperor negotiating with the victorious Napoleon. The Treaty of Pressburg. The military disaster at Austerlitz forced Austria to accept the harsh Treaty of Pressburg on December 26, 1805. Austria ceded Venetia, Istria, and Dalmatia to Napoleon's Kingdom of Italy, while Tyrol and other territories went to Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden, German states allied with France. Austria also had to pay a massive war indemnity of 40 million francs. Military reforms in the 1809 campaign. Between 1805 and 1809, Austria undertook significant military reforms. From earliest times, Austrian territory has been a thoroughfare, a battleground, and a wilderness of grass and bushes. The Austrian military leadership recognized the need to adapt to French tactics and organization. Archduke Charles introduced a corps system similar to the French model, improved officer training, and created a militia, Landwehr, to supplement the regular army. These reforms paid dividends in the early stages of the 1809 campaign. The Battle of Aspern-Essling. In May 1809, Archduke Charles achieved what no other general had accomplished. He defeated Napoleon in a major battle. At Aspern-Essling, the Austrians prevented Napoleon from crossing the Danube in force, inflicting around 23,000 casualties on the French while suffering 24,000 themselves. This tactical victory boosted Austrian morale significantly. The Battle of Wagram. Despite this success, the decisive engagement came at Wagram in July 1809. The Battle of Wagram, fought on June 6, 1809, was a pivotal engagement in the Napoleonic Wars, marking a significant turning point in the conflict between the French Empire and the Austrian Empire. This massive battle involved enormous numbers of troops, with the French fielding approximately 170,000 men against 140,000 Austrians. After 2 days of brutal fighting, Napoleon emerged victorious, though at a heavy cost. The French suffered around 34,000 casualties, while the Austrians lost approximately 40,000 men. The Treaty of Schönbrunn. The defeat at Wagram forced Austria to accept the Treaty of Schönbrunn in October 1809. Austria ceded Salzburg to Bavaria, western Galicia to the Duchy of Warsaw, and parts of Carinthia and Croatia to France's Illyrian provinces. The Austrian Empire lost about 3.5 million subjects and was forced to reduce its army to 150,000 men. Perhaps most humiliating was the forced marriage alliance. Emperor Francis had to give his daughter, Marie-Louise, in marriage to Napoleon in 1810, symbolizing Austria's subordination to French power. The War of the Sixth Coalition, 1813 to 1814. After Napoleon's disastrous Russian campaign in 1812, Austria found itself in a position to negotiate from strength for the first time in years. Metternich's diplomatic maneuvering. Under Foreign Minister Clemens von Metternich's guidance, Austria initially maintained neutrality in early 1813, offering to mediate between France and the Allied powers, Russia and Prussia. This allowed Austria to rebuild its military strength while extracting concessions from both sides. When Napoleon rejected Austria's mediation, Austria joined the Sixth Coalition in August 1813, bringing 200,000 fresh troops to the Allied cause. Austrian Field Marshal Karl Philipp, Prince of Schwarzenberg, was appointed commander-in-chief of the Allied armies. The Battle of Leipzig. The decisive engagement came at Leipzig in October 1813, often called the Battle of Nations. This was the largest battle in Europe prior to World War I, involving over 600,000 troops. The Austrian contingent formed a crucial part of the Allied force that defeated Napoleon's army. The battle lasted 4 days, October 16 and 19, 1813, and ended with a decisive Allied victory. Napoleon lost about 73,000 men killed, wounded, or captured, and was forced to retreat to France. The Austrian contribution was significant, with Schwarzenberg's careful coordination of the various Allied contingents proving crucial to victory. The 1814 campaign and First Peace of Paris Austrian forces participated in the invasion of France in early 1814, with Schwarzenberg commanding the main Allied army advancing through Switzerland. After a series of battles, the Allies captured Paris on March 31, 1814, forcing Napoleon's abdication. The First Peace of Paris, signed on May 30, 1814, was relatively lenient toward France, largely due to Metternich's influence. Austria recovered most of its lost territories, including Lombardy, Venetia, and northern Italy, while maintaining its position as a great power. The Congress of Vienna and the Hundred Days, 1814 to 1815. The Congress of Vienna, hosted by Emperor Francis I in the Austrian capital, represented the diplomatic culmination of Austria's military efforts. Under Metternich's leadership, Austria secured favorable territorial settlements and established itself as the leading power in the German Confederation and Italy. When Napoleon escaped from Elba in March 1815, Austria joined the Seventh Coalition against him. Although Austrian forces did not participate in the Battle of Waterloo, they formed part of the massive Allied armies that invaded France after Napoleon's defeat. Military legacy and transformation. The Napoleonic Wars fundamentally transformed the Austrian military. The repeated defeats at French hands forced Austria to modernize its army, adopting elements of the French corps system and improving officer training. The creation of the Landwehr militia in 1808 represented an important innovation, allowing Austria to mobilize larger forces than before. Despite these reforms, Austria's military remained hampered by financial constraints and the multinational character of the empire. The wars demonstrated both Austria's resilience, its ability to recover from devastating defeats, and its limitations as a military power. The experience of the Napoleonic Wars shaped Austrian strategic thinking for decades to come, reinforcing Metternich's preference for diplomacy over military confrontation and establishing Austria as a conservative bulwark against revolutionary movements throughout Europe. Congress of Vienna, 1815, and Austria's leading role. Following Napoleon's final defeat, the victorious powers convened the Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, to redraw the map of Europe and establish a new political order. Hosted in the Austrian capital and largely guided by the brilliant Austrian statesman Prince Clemens von Metternich, Austria played a central role. Metternich's goals were to restore stability, create a balance of power to prevent future dominance by any single nation, especially France, uphold the principle of monarchical legitimacy, and suppress revolutionary ideals. Austria regained many of its lost territories, like Tyrol, Salzburg, Lombardy, Venetia, and emerged as a leading power in the newly formed German Confederation, with the Austrian Emperor holding its presidency. The Congress established the Concert of Europe, a system aimed at maintaining peace through diplomacy and cooperation among the major powers, with Austria under Metternich as a key architect and pillar of this conservative order. Internal challenges. While Austria emerged territorially restored and diplomatically influential after 1815, the empire faced significant internal challenges. The Napoleonic Wars had inadvertently spread ideas of liberalism and nationalism across Europe. Within the multi-ethnic Austrian Empire, comprising Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Romanians, Croats, Serbs, Slovenes, Italians, and others, these ideas posed a direct threat to Habsburg rule and imperial unity. Metternich implemented a conservative system characterized by censorship, secret police, and suppression of nationalist aspirations and demands for political reform. However, these forces could not be entirely contained. Nationalist movements continued to grow, particularly among Hungarians, Italians, and Czechs, while liberal demands for a constitutional government and greater freedoms simmered beneath the surface. These internal tensions, rooted in the diverse composition of the empire and fueled by the ideologies unleashed by the revolutionary era, would increasingly challenge the stability of the Austrian Empire throughout the 19th century, eventually erupting in the revolutions of 1848. Austria-Hungary, the dual monarchy, 1867–1918. The Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, Ausgleich, fundamentally transformed the Habsburg Empire into a unique political entity. This agreement regulated the relations between Austria and Hungary and established the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. The compromise emerged from a position of Austrian weakness following defeat in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, which severely undermined Austria's position in German affairs. The Ausgleich was primarily negotiated between Emperor Franz Joseph and Hungarian political leaders, particularly Ferenc Dék and Count Gyula Andrássy. As Franz Joseph himself acknowledged, there were three of us who made the agreement, Dék, Andrássy, and myself. The agreement created two largely autonomous states under a single monarch. One, the Austrian half, officially the kingdoms and lands represented in the Imperial Council, unofficially Cisleithania. Two, the Hungarian half, officially the Kingdom of Hungary, unofficially Transleithania. Each entity had its own parliament, government, and administrative system. However, they shared three key ministries: foreign affairs, war, and joint finance, to fund the common ministries. The common monarchy consisted of the emperor and his court, the minister for foreign affairs, and the minister of war. There was no common prime minister and no common cabinet. The compromise represented a significant shift from Hungary's previous status. The relationship of Hungary to Austria before the 1848 revolution had been personal union, whereas after the Compromise of 1867, its status was reduced to partnership in a real union. The agreement ended 18 years of absolutist rule over Hungary following the failed Hungarian Revolution of 1848. It restored Hungary's territorial integrity and its historic constitution, which had limited the power of the crown since the 13th century. The Golden Bull of 1222 was one of the earliest examples of constitutional limits being placed on the powers of a European monarch. Ethnic diversity and governance challenges. Austria-Hungary was extraordinarily diverse ethnically, making governance exceptionally challenging. As the Schengen Academy notes, the empire encompassed numerous ethnic groups: Germans, Czechs, Poles, Ukrainians, Ruthenians, Slovenes, Italians, Croats, and Romanians in the Austrian half, and Magyars, Hungarians, Romanians, Slovaks, Croats, Serbs, Germans, and Ukrainians in the Hungarian half. The two halves of the monarchy handled this diversity differently. In Austria, various nationalities were granted different degrees of cultural and linguistic rights, leading to constant political maneuvering in the Imperial Council, Reichsrat. In Hungary, the government pursued aggressive Magyarization policies aimed at assimilating minorities, which created significant tensions, particularly with Croats, Slovaks, and Romanians. Considering the history of the Habsburg Empire after 1867, it is important to emphasize that the state had in fact three governments: the joint Austro-Hungarian administration and the separate governments for Austria and Hungary. Economic development. Despite its political complexities, the dual monarchy period saw significant economic development. The Austria Forum notes that the Austro-Hungarian monarchy was the second biggest state following Russia in Europe, giving it considerable economic potential. Industrial development was concentrated in certain regions: Bohemia, modern Czech Republic; Lower Austria around Vienna; parts of Silesia; Budapest and its surroundings. Key industries included textiles, iron and steel production, machinery manufacturing, and food processing. The empire also saw substantial expansion of its railway network, which facilitated trade and resource transport. However, economic development was uneven. While regions like Bohemia and Lower Austria industrialized rapidly, other areas such as Galicia, Bukovina, and rural Hungary remained predominantly agricultural and underdeveloped. This economic disparity reinforced existing ethnic and social tensions. Political evolution and challenges. The political system established by the Ausgleich faced numerous challenges throughout its existence. Hungarian nationalism. Despite the compromise, many ethnic Hungarians considered it a betrayal of Hungarian interests. Minority nationalism. The rise of nationalist movements among Czechs, Poles, South Slavs, and other groups increasingly challenged the dualist structure. Demands for greater autonomy or independence grew stronger throughout the period. Electoral reform. In both halves of the monarchy, pressure for electoral reform and democratization increased. Austria introduced universal male suffrage in 1907, while Hungary maintained a more restrictive electoral system. Ati. Periodic renewal. The economic aspects of the compromise required renegotiation every 10 years. This decennial discussion of financial quotas became one of the main sources of conflict between the Hungarian and Austrian governments. International relations and the road to World War I. In foreign affairs, the dual monarchy increasingly focused on the Balkans after being excluded from German affairs in 1866. The occupation and later annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina, 1878-1908, brought millions of South Slavs under Habsburg rule, further complicating the empire's ethnic composition. The monarchy maintained the Triple Alliance with Germany and Italy, but relations with Russia deteriorated over Balkan interests. Growing tensions with Serbia, which sought to unite all South Slavs under its leadership, ultimately led to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914 and the outbreak of World War I. The Austro-Hungarian Compromise created a unique political structure that lasted for 51 years until the empire's dissolution in 1918. While it failed to resolve the fundamental challenges of governing a multinational state in an age of nationalism, it did provide a framework that allowed for significant economic development and cultural flourishing. The legacy of the dual monarchy continues to influence Central European politics and culture today. The administrative boundaries established during this period form the basis for many of the successor states that emerged after World War I, and the cultural and architectural heritage of the Habsburg era remains visible throughout the region. The Bosnian Crisis, a pivotal turning point. The Bosnian Crisis of 1908-1909 marked a critical turning point in Austria-Hungary's foreign policy and set the stage for the empire's eventual downfall. On October 6, 1908, Austria-Hungary formally annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, territories it had administered since 1878, but which nominally remained under Ottoman sovereignty. This unilateral action created a state of severe international tension that permanently altered the European diplomatic landscape. The annexation was orchestrated by Austro-Hungarian Foreign Minister Alois von Aehrenthal, who saw an opportunity in the weakening Ottoman Empire following the Young Turk Revolution. Aehrenthal negotiated secretly with Russian Foreign Minister Alexander Izvolsky at Buchlau Castle in Moravia, where Izvolsky allegedly agreed not to oppose the annexation in exchange for Austrian support for opening the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits to Russian warships. However, when Austria-Hungary suddenly announced the annexation, it triggered international outrage. The announcement in October 1908 of Austria-Hungary's annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina upset the fragile balance of power in the Balkans, enraging Serbia and pan-Slavic nationalists throughout Europe. The annexation particularly inflamed relations with Serbia, which had aspirations to unite all South Slavic peoples. According to Wikipedia, Austro-Serbian relations, harmed by the annexation's inflaming of Serbian nationalists, continued to be strained to the point of declaring war on each other in 1914. The crisis revealed the fundamental conflict between Austria-Hungary's determination to maintain its position as a great power and Serbia's nationalist ambitions. Serbia, backed by Russia, demanded territorial compensation, but Austria-Hungary, supported by Germany, threatened to invade Serbia if it persisted in its demands. Russia, still recovering from its defeat in the Russo-Japanese War and lacking strong French support, was forced to back down. In March 1909, Russia formally accepted Austria-Hungary's annexation, humiliating Russian diplomacy and creating deep resentment that would influence future Russian policy toward Austria-Hungary. Consequences of the Bosnian Crisis. The Bosnian Crisis had profound implications for the European alliance system. As History.com explains, during the crisis, German Chief of Staff Helmut von Moltke assured his Austrian counterpart that Germany would support Austria-Hungary in a war against Russia and France, even if Austria was the aggressor. This unconditional support emboldened Austria-Hungary in its aggressive Balkan policy. The crisis also accelerated the polarization of Europe into two hostile camps: the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and nominally Italy, though Italy's commitment was increasingly questionable; the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Great Britain. Austria-Hungary's diplomatic position deteriorated after the crisis. Although the crisis ended with what appeared to be a total Austro-Hungarian diplomatic victory, it permanently damaged relations between Austria-Hungary and its neighbors, especially Serbia, Italy, and Russia, and in the long term helped lay the grounds for World War I. Escalation in the Balkans. Following the Bosnian crisis, tensions in the Balkans continued to escalate. The Balkan Wars of 1912–1913 further destabilized the region. First Balkan War, 1912 to 1913. Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, and Bulgaria defeated the Ottoman Empire, significantly expanding Serbia's territory and prestige. Second Balkan War, 1913. Bulgaria attacked its former allies but was defeated, further strengthening Serbia. Serbia's victories in these wars increased its confidence and territorial ambitions, directly threatening Austria-Hungary's strategic interests. The empire now faced a more powerful and assertive Serbia on its southern border, with growing influence among South Slavs within Austria-Hungary itself. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, provided Austria-Hungary with the pretext to finally confront Serbia. The assassin Gavrilo Princip was a Bosnian Serb nationalist with connections to the Serbian nationalist organization Black Hand. Austria-Hungary, convinced that decisive action against Serbia was necessary to preserve the empire, issued an intentionally harsh ultimatum to Serbia on July 23, 1914. When Serbia's response was deemed unsatisfactory, Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, triggering the alliance system that plunged Europe into World War I. In the summer of 1914, it would do just that, as the struggle for power in the tumultuous Balkans morphed into the devastating international conflict that would become known as the First World War. World War I and the collapse of Austria-Hungary. World War I proved catastrophic for Austria-Hungary. The empire faced fighting on multiple fronts: Eastern Front against Russia, Balkan Front against Serbia and later Romania, Italian Front. After Italy entered the war against its former allies in 1915. Despite German support, Austria-Hungary suffered severe military setbacks. By 1916, the empire was increasingly dependent on German assistance, and Emperor Franz Joseph's death in November 1916 removed a key symbol of unity. His successor, Emperor Karl I, attempted to negotiate a separate peace but was unable to extricate the empire from its German alliance. As the war progressed, nationalist movements within Austria-Hungary gained strength. The empire's diverse ethnic groups increasingly looked toward independence rather than continued Habsburg rule. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which emphasized national self-determination, further encouraged these separatist movements. By October 1918, with military defeat imminent and the empire disintegrating along ethnic lines, Emperor Karl issued a manifesto proposing to reorganize Austria into a federal union. However, this last-minute attempt at reform came too late. In the final weeks of the war, independent states were proclaimed by Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Hungarians, and South Slavs. The Austro-Hungarian Empire formally dissolved following the armistice of November 11, 1918. The peace treaties of Saint-Germain, 1919, with Austria, and Trianon, 1920, with Hungary, confirmed the empire's dissolution and the creation of successor states based largely on ethnic boundaries. Key factors in Austria-Hungary's downfall. The foreign policy challenges that Austria-Hungary faced from 1908 to 1918 reveal several critical factors that contributed to the empire's downfall. Over-reliance on German support, which encouraged risky diplomatic and military ventures. Inability to resolve the South Slav question, which created persistent security threats. Failure to adapt to rising nationalism both within and beyond its borders. Diplomatic isolation resulting from aggressive policies, particularly the annexation of Bosnia. The Bosnian crisis of 1908 represented a Pyrrhic victory for Austria-Hungary, a short-term diplomatic success that created long-term strategic vulnerabilities. By prioritizing immediate territorial gains over sustainable diplomatic relationships, Austria-Hungary set itself on a path that ultimately led to its dissolution in the aftermath of World War I, the alliance system and outbreak of war. By the early 20th century, Europe was entangled in a complex web of military alliances. Austria-Hungary was firmly allied with Germany in the Dual Alliance, 1879, which later expanded into the Triple Alliance with Italy, though Italy's commitment was uncertain and it eventually joined the opposing side. Opposing them was the Triple Entente comprising France, Russia, and Great Britain. This rigid system meant that a conflict involving one major power could quickly draw in others. The immediate trigger for the war was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. The assassin Gavrilo Princip was a Bosnian Serb nationalist linked to groups seeking to unite South Slav territories, including Bosnia-Herzegovina under Serbian leadership. Seeing the assassination as a direct challenge to its authority and fueled by a desire to crush Serbian nationalism, the Austro-Hungarian government, after securing unconditional support from Germany, the blank check, issued a harsh ultimatum to Serbia. Serbia's partial rejection of the ultimatum led Austria-Hungary to declare war on July 28, 1914. Russia mobilized to support Serbia, triggering Germany's declaration of war on Russia and France, and subsequently Great Britain's entry into the conflict, engulfing Europe in war. Austria-Hungary's war effort. Austria-Hungary found itself fighting a multi-front war for which it was ill-prepared. The main fronts were the Eastern Front, against Russia. This front saw immense bloody battles across Galicia, modern Poland, Ukraine, and the Carpathians. Initial Austro-Hungarian offensives failed, leading to heavy losses and Russian occupation of Galicia. German support became crucial to stabilize the front and achieve successes like the Gorlice-Tarnow Offensive, 1915, but the sheer scale and attrition were devastating. The Balkan Front. Initially focused on Serbia, the Austro-Hungarian army struggled, suffering early defeats before finally conquering Serbia in late 1915 with German and Bulgarian help. The Italian Front. After Italy joined the Entente powers in 1915, a brutal front opened along the Isonzo River and in the Alps. This became a horrific war of attrition, characterized by costly offensives like the 12 battles of the Isonzo and the Austro-German breakthrough at Caporetto, 1917. The Austro-Hungarian army, though large, suffered from internal divisions reflecting the empire's ethnic diversity. Communication difficulties between different language groups, varying levels of commitment, and chronic under-equipment hampered its effectiveness. It became increasingly reliant on German military leadership and support as the war progressed. The home front and internal collapse. The war placed immense strain on the Austro-Hungarian home front. The Allied naval blockade led to severe shortages of food, fuel, and raw materials. Rationing was imposed, malnutrition became widespread, and civilian morale plummeted. The economy buckled under the pressure of war financing and declining production. The initial patriotic fervor quickly faded, replaced by war weariness and growing discontent. Emperor Franz Joseph died in 1916 and was succeeded by his grandnephew, Emperor Karl I. Karl attempted peace initiatives and internal reforms, but it was too late. Nationalist movements suppressed before the war gained momentum. Leaders of various ethnic groups, Czechs, Poles, South Slavs, increasingly sought outright independence rather than autonomy within the empire. Desertions from the army increased, and strikes and protests became more common. By 1918, the empire was disintegrating from within. Dissolution and aftermath military defeat on the Italian front in late October 1918, Battle of Vittorio Veneto, coincided with the internal collapse. On October 28, Czechoslovakia declared independence, followed swiftly by South Slav declarations, leading to the formation of Yugoslavia, Polish independence claims, and Hungary formally severing ties with Austria. On November 11, 1918, Emperor Karl I relinquished his governmental powers without formally abdicating, and the Habsburg monarchy effectively ceased to exist. The aftermath was formalized by peace treaties imposed by the victorious Allied powers. The Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, September 1919, dealt specifically with Austria. It formally dissolved the Austrian half of the empire, recognized the independence of Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, and Yugoslavia, and ceded territories to Italy and Romania. Austria was reduced to a small German-speaking republic, initially named German Austria, but the name and any union with Germany were forbidden by the treaty, stripped of its non-German territories, and burdened with reparations. The Treaty of Trianon, June 1920, imposed similarly harsh terms on Hungary, drastically reducing its territory and population. These treaties redrew the map of Central Europe, dismantling the centuries-old Habsburg Empire and creating a new landscape of nation-states, but also leaving behind unresolved tensions and minority issues. Aftermath of World War I and the First Austrian Republic, 1918 to 1933. The end of World War I in November 1918 brought not peace and stability, but profound upheaval and uncertainty for the German-speaking core of the former Habsburg Empire. Stripped of its vast non-German territories and its imperial identity, the newly formed republic faced immense political, economic, and social challenges as it navigated the turbulent interwar years. With the military defeat and internal collapse of Austria-Hungary in the final weeks of the war, the empire rapidly disintegrated along ethnic lines. Emperor Karl I relinquished governmental authority on November 11, 1918. The following day, November 12, 1918, the Provisional National Assembly in Vienna formally proclaimed the Republic of German Austria, Republik Deutschösterreich. This name reflected the initial hope held by many, particularly the dominant Social Democrats, for eventual unification, Anschluss, with the newly formed German Republic, Weimar Republic, seeing the small Austrian state as economically unviable on its own. The victorious Allied powers, however, had other plans. The Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, signed in September 1919, dictated the terms for the new Austrian state. It formally dissolved the Austro-Hungarian Empire and established Austria's drastically reduced borders, confirming the loss of Bohemia, Moravia, Austrian Silesia, South Tyrol, Istria, the Dalmatian coast, Carniola, Lower Styria, Galicia, and Bukovina. The treaty explicitly prohibited Anschluss, unification with Germany, without the consent of the League of Nations Council, a major blow to Austrian aspirations. It also forced the country to change its name to the Republic of Austria, Republik Österreich, imposed significant military restrictions, limiting the army's size and equipment, and demanded reparations, though these were largely impractical given Austria's economic state. The treaty left Austria as a small, landlocked republic, often referred to derisively as a hydrocephalus due to the disproportionate size of its former imperial capital, Vienna, relative to the rest of the country. Economic crisis and social unrest. The First Republic inherited a disastrous economic situation. The breakup of the empire severed Vienna and Austrian industrial areas from their traditional sources of raw materials, like coal from Bohemia, and agricultural hinterlands, like the Hungarian plains. Austria was left with significant industrial capacity but lacked the resources and markets to sustain it. This led to rampant unemployment. Furthermore, the war effort and the subsequent economic dislocation triggered devastating hyperinflation in the early 1920s, wiping out savings and causing immense hardship. Food shortages were severe in the immediate post-war years. The Republic became heavily dependent on foreign loans, primarily arranged through the League of Nations to stabilize its currency. The shilling replaced the krone in 1925, and economy. These economic difficulties fueled widespread social unrest, strikes, and political radicalization. Political polarization and instability. The political landscape of the First Republic was deeply polarized and unstable. Two main political camps dominated: the Social Democratic Workers' Party, SDAPO, strongest in Red Vienna, CIU, where they implemented ambitious social housing and welfare programs. They advocated for democratic socialism and initially supported Anschluss. The Christian Social Party, CS, a conservative Catholic-oriented party with its power base in rural areas and among the bourgeoisie. They were staunchly anti-socialist and increasingly authoritarian. These two camps, along with smaller nationalist groups, viewed each other with deep suspicion and hostility. Both major parties maintained armed paramilitary wings. The Social Democrats had the Republikanischer Schutzbund, while the Christian Socials were allied with the various right-wing Heimwehr, Home Guard militias. Political rhetoric became increasingly radicalized, exemplified by the Social Democrats' 1926 Linz program, which included Marxist language about the dictatorship of the proletariat as a potential necessity, and the Heimwehr's 1930 Korneuburg Oath, which explicitly rejected parliamentary democracy. Frequent changes in coalition governments failed to bridge the ideological divide. Clashes between political paramilitaries became common, culminating in events like the July Revolt of 1927, following the acquittal of Heimwehr members for killing a social democrat and a child, where police fired on protesters, killing dozens and leading to the burning of the Palace of Justice in Vienna. This escalating political violence and instability eroded democratic norms and paved the way for the authoritarian turn of the 1930s. The rise of Austrofascism and the end of democracy, the deep political polarization and escalating violence of the late 1920s and early 1930s created an environment ripe for authoritarianism. Amidst the global economic depression and inspired by fascist movements elsewhere in Europe, particularly in Italy, Austria's fragile democracy collapsed. In March 1933, citing irregularities during a parliamentary session, Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss of the Christian Social Party used the opportunity to suspend parliament indefinitely. Ruling by emergency decree under wartime laws from 1917, Dollfuss swiftly moved to dismantle parliamentary democracy and establish an authoritarian regime. He banned the Communist Party and the Austrian Nazi Party. He consolidated power by creating the Fatherland Front, Vaterlandische Front, in May 1933, intended as a unifying, patriotic, nonpartisan organization, which soon became the sole legal political entity. Dollfuss envisioned a new Austria based on corporatist principles, inspired by Catholic social teaching and Italian fascism, known as the Standesstaat, corporate state. This ideology, often termed Austrofascism, rejected both liberal democracy and Marxism, aiming for a hierarchical society organized by professional guilds or corporations under authoritarian leadership. The Austrian Civil War, 1934. The Dollfuss regime increasingly targeted its main political rival, the Social Democratic Party. Government crackdowns, raids on party headquarters, and the banning of the Social Democrats' paramilitary wing, the Republikanischer Schutzbund, heightened tensions. In February 1934, government forces attempted to search the Social Democratic headquarters in Linz, triggering armed resistance. The conflict quickly escalated into the Austrian Civil War, primarily fought in Vienna, especially in large social housing blocks like the Karl-Marx-Hof, Linz, Steyr, and other industrial centers. The poorly armed Schutzbund was no match for the combined forces of the Federal Army, police, and the Allied Heimwehr militias, who used artillery against worker districts. After several days of fighting, the socialist uprising was brutally suppressed. The Social Democratic Party and its affiliated trade unions were banned, their leaders arrested or forced into exile. This victory decisively consolidated the Austro-fascist regime's power, eliminating its most significant organized opposition. A new constitution formally establishing the Standesstaat was promulgated in May 1934. The July Putsch and Nazi threat, despite suppressing the Social Democrats, the Dollfuss regime faced continued pressure from the banned Austrian Nazi Party, which advocated for unification with Germany and received support from Hitler's regime. On July 25, 1934, Austrian Nazis attempted a coup d'état, known as the July Putsch. A group of Nazis stormed the Chancellery building in Vienna and shot Chancellor Dollfuss, who bled to death. Other Nazi groups seized the radio station and broadcast false reports of a transfer of power. However, the coup ultimately failed as the majority of the Austrian military and police remained loyal to the government. Crucially, Italy's fascist leader Benito Mussolini, who saw Dollfuss as an ally and sought to prevent German expansion, mobilized Italian troops at the Brenner Pass border, deterring any potential German intervention. Following the failed putsch, Kurt Schuschnigg, Dollfuss's Minister of Justice, took over as Chancellor. The Anschluss and the end of Austrian independence, Schuschnigg continued the Austro-fascist dictatorship under the Fatherland Front, attempting to navigate the increasingly difficult path of maintaining Austrian independence. However, the regime suffered from internal weaknesses. It lacked broad popular support, faced continued economic difficulties, and dealt with underground opposition from both the suppressed Social Democrats and the emboldened Nazis. Externally, Austria became increasingly isolated. Mussolini, previously Austria's main protector, forged closer ties with Hitler following the Second Italo-Ethiopian War and the Spanish Civil War, forming the Rome-Berlin axis. Adolf Hitler relentlessly increased pressure on Austria. In February 1938, he summoned Schuschnigg to his mountain retreat in Berchtesgaden and bullied him into accepting an agreement that effectively subordinated Austria to Germany. This included appointing Austrian Nazis to key government positions, such as Arthur Seyss-Inquart as Minister of the Interior. Realizing Austria's independence was slipping away, Schuschnigg made a desperate gamble. He announced a plebiscite on Austrian independence for March 13, 1938, hoping a yes vote would strengthen his position. Hitler, furious at this act of defiance, demanded the plebiscite's cancellation and Schuschnigg's resignation in favor of Seyss-Inquart. Facing the threat of immediate military invasion and abandoned by Italy, Schuschnigg resigned on March 11th. German troops crossed the border early on March 12th, meeting no resistance and often welcomed by enthusiastic crowds. On March 13, 1938, the Anschluss, annexation of Austria into Nazi Germany, was formally proclaimed, ending Austria's existence as an independent state and marking the demise of the First Republic and its Austro-fascist successor state. Anschluss and World War II, 1938-1945. The annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany in 1938 marked a dark chapter in the nation's history, erasing its independence and integrating it fully into the Third Reich's war machine and machinery of terror. Following Chancellor Schuschnigg's forced resignation under intense pressure from Adolf Hitler, German troops crossed the Austrian border on March 12, 1938. This military occupation, termed the Anschluss, connection or joining, faced no military resistance from the Austrian army, which had been ordered not to fight. While international condemnation was muted, particularly from Britain and France, who pursued policies of appeasement, the arrival of German forces was met with considerable enthusiasm by large segments of the Austrian population, particularly Austrian Nazis and those who had long favored unification. Hitler himself, an Austrian by birth, made a triumphant entry into Vienna, greeted by cheering crowds. On March 13, 1938, the formal annexation law incorporated Austria into the German Reich. Austria was initially renamed Ostmark and later Alpen- und Donau-Reichsgaue, effectively erasing its name and identity as a distinct country. A plebiscite held in April under Nazi supervision yielded an official, highly dubious result of over 99% approval for the annexation. With the Anschluss, Austria and its citizens were fully integrated into the structures of Nazi Germany. Austrian men became subject to conscription into the Wehrmacht, German armed forces, and participated in all theaters of World War II. Austrians also played significant roles within the Nazi Party apparatus, the SS, and the administration of occupied territories. Indeed, individuals of Austrian origin were disproportionately represented in the Nazi hierarchy and involved in perpetrating war crimes and atrocities, including figures like Adolf Hitler himself, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, head of the Reich Security Main Office after Heydrich, Arthur Seyss-Inquart, later Reich Commissioner for the occupied Netherlands, and Odilo Globoknik, a key figure in Operation Reinhard, the extermination of Polish Jews. Vienna became an important administrative and military center within the Reich. The arrival of the Nazis unleashed immediate and brutal persecution, primarily targeting Austria's Jewish population, around 200,000 people, mostly in Vienna. Anti-Semitic laws were swiftly implemented, Jewish property was confiscated, Aryanized, synagogues were desecrated, especially during the Kristallnacht pogrom in November 1938, and Jews faced systematic discrimination, violence, forced emigration, and ultimately deportation to concentration and extermination camps. Tens of thousands of Austrian Jews perished in the Holocaust. Political opponents, former Social Democrats, communists, monarchists, members of the Austro-fascist regime, Roma, homosexuals, people with disabilities, and other groups deemed undesirable by the regime were also persecuted, arrested, imprisoned in concentration camps, like the newly established Mauthausen camp near Linz, or executed. Dissent was ruthlessly suppressed by the Gestapo, secret police, and the Nazi security apparatus. Simultaneously, the Austrian economy was fully integrated into the German war effort. Industries were geared towards armaments production, and resources were exploited for Germany's military needs. Like the rest of the Reich, Austria experienced the hardships of war, including rationing, labor shortages, often filled by forced laborers, and eventually Allied bombing raids targeting industrial centers in cities like Vienna, Wiener Neustadt, and Linz, particularly from 1943 onwards. End of World War II and Allied occupation. As the tide of war turned against Nazi Germany, Allied forces advanced towards Austria. Soviet forces launched the Vienna Offensive in April 1945, capturing the capital after intense fighting. American, British, and French forces entered western and southern Austria around the same time. With the final defeat and unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany in May 1945, the 7-year period of annexation came to an end. Austria, however, did not immediately regain full sovereignty. The country was occupied by the four Allied powers, USA, USSR, UK, France, mirroring the occupation of Germany. Vienna, like Berlin, was also divided into 4 occupation zones, with the historic city center, 1st District, administered jointly on a rotating basis. This Allied occupation would last for 10 years, during which Austria's political future and the restoration of its independence were negotiated. On April 27, 1945, even before the final German surrender, Austrian politicians from the pre-1934 parties declared the Anschluss null and void and re-established the Republic of Austria under a provisional government led by Karl Renner, laying the foundation for the post-war Second Republic. Following Nazi Germany's defeat in May 1945, Austria entered a decade of four-power occupation. Austria was occupied by the Allies and declared independent from Nazi Germany on 27 April 1945 as a result of the Vienna Offensive. Unlike Germany, which was later divided into East and West, Austria remained under joint Allied occupation until 1955. The occupation zones were established on July 9, 1945, dividing Austria among the 4 Allied powers: Soviet Zone, Lower Austria, Burgenland, and Upper Austria north of the Danube, Mühlviertel, American Zone, Upper Austria south of the Danube, and Salzburg, British Zone, Styria, Carinthia, and East Tyrol. French Zone, Vorarlberg, and North Tyrol, Vienna, though deep within the Soviet Zone, was similarly divided into 4 sectors, with the historic 1st District administered jointly on a rotating monthly basis by the Allied Control Council. A crucial difference between occupied Austria and Germany was the early re-establishment of Austrian self-governance. On April 27, 1945, even before the war officially ended, veteran Social Democrat Karl Renner formed a provisional government in Vienna with Soviet approval. As on 20th of April 1945, the Soviets, without asking their Western allies, instructed Renner to form a provisional government. This provisional government included representatives from three main democratic parties: the Socialist Party, SPO, the Conservative People's Party, OVP, the Communist Party, KPO. Initially, the Western Allies were suspicious of Renner's government, fearing it might be a Soviet puppet. The British were particularly hostile, though American President Harry Truman believed Renner was trustworthy. This provisional government declared the Anschluss null and void and aimed to restore Austria based on its pre-war democratic constitution. The first free parliamentary elections since 1930 were held on November 25, 1945. The results were a significant setback for Soviet influence. The election held on 25 November 1945 was a blow for the Communist Party of Austria, which received a bit more than 5% of the vote. The conservative OVP emerged as the strongest party, followed closely by the SPO, with both parties forming a coalition government. Leopold Figl of the OVP became chancellor after the Soviets vetoed Julius Raab, who had been associated with the Austro-fascist Fatherland Front in the 1930s. This democratic government, backed by 90% of Austrian voters, provided a strong foundation for Austria's post-war recovery and eventual independence. Austria faced severe economic challenges after the war. Infrastructure was heavily damaged, and there were critical shortages of food, fuel, and housing. The division into occupation zones hampered economic activity, and the Soviets dismantled and removed significant industrial assets from their zone as reparations. A crucial turning point came with the implementation of the Marshall Plan European Recovery Program from 1948 onwards. This American aid program provided vital capital for rebuilding infrastructure, modernizing industry, and stabilizing the currency. The Austria Forum notes that during the last weeks of World War II, Allied troops occupied the whole of Austria, creating a complex economic situation that required substantial international assistance to overcome. As the Cold War intensified, Austria's status became increasingly contentious. According to the U.S. State Department's historical account, the breakdown of the wartime Grand Alliance and the emergence of the Cold War led to the Austrian occupation lasting far longer than anyone anticipated. Negotiations for a treaty to end the occupation began in 1947 but stalled repeatedly due to several factors. Disputes over German assets. The Soviets had seized factories, railroads, oil fields, and shipping concerns in their zone and demanded compensation. Cold War tensions, the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, and deteriorating East-West relations complicated negotiations. Strategic considerations, Austria's position between East and West made both sides reluctant to withdraw. A breakthrough finally came after Stalin's death in 1953, when Soviet leadership under Nikita Khrushchev initiated a peace offensive to reduce international tensions. As the U.S. State Department history explains, in April of 1955, and after substantial debate on both sides, representatives of the Austrian government traveled to Moscow and returned just 4 days later with a complete treaty. The Austrian State Treaty and Declaration of Neutrality. The Austrian State Treaty was signed on May 15, 1955, at the Belvedere Palace in Vienna. It was signed among the Allied occupying powers, France, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the Soviet Union, and the Austrian government. Key provisions of the treaty included re-establishment of Austria as a free, sovereign, and democratic state, prohibition of Anschluss, political union with Germany, protection of minority rights for Slovenes and Croats, prohibition of Nazi and fascist organizations, some economic concessions to the Soviet Union, including oil field rights. The treaty officially came into force on July 27, 1955, and the last occupation troops left Austria on October 25, 1955. Crucially, though not explicitly mentioned in the treaty itself, Austria declared its permanent neutrality on October 26, 1955, now celebrated as Austria's National Day. This declaration, enshrined in a constitutional law passed by the Austrian parliament, was a key condition for securing Soviet agreement to the state treaty. It committed Austria to not joining military alliances like NATO or the Warsaw Pact and not allowing foreign military bases on its territory. The Austrian State Treaty represented a unique Cold War success story. As the U.S. State Department notes, it was the only treaty signed by both the Soviet Union and United States in the decade after the 1947 Paris peace treaties, and it marked the only Cold War-era withdrawal by the Soviet Union from a territory it occupied. Austria's path to independence through neutrality created a model that some hoped might be applied to Germany, though this never materialized. Instead, Austria established itself as a neutral bridge between East and West during the Cold War, hosting numerous international organizations and conferences. The successful negotiation of the State Treaty demonstrated that despite Cold War tensions, diplomatic solutions were possible when both sides perceived mutual benefits. For Austria, the treaty ended a decade of occupation and allowed the country to rebuild its sovereignty and democracy. For the Soviet Union, it secured a neutral buffer state in Central Europe, while for the Western powers, it removed Soviet troops from a strategic position in the heart of Europe. Austria's neutrality solution became a cornerstone of its national identity and foreign policy throughout the Cold War and beyond, allowing it to maintain good relations with both East and West while pursuing its own independent path of democratic development and economic prosperity. After regaining sovereignty in 1955, Austria developed a distinctive political system characterized by stability and cooperation between the two major parties. At the heart of this system was the concept of propors, proportionality, a long-standing practice in the Second Austrian Republic in which positions in government are distributed between political parties in a manner proportional to their electoral or public support. The propors system emerged from Austria's desire to avoid the ideological factionalism that had characterized the First Republic, 1919 to 1934, which ultimately led to civil war and the Austro-fascist dictatorship. As Wikipedia explains, after the re-establishment of Austrian independence in 1945, there was a great desire to avoid the ideological factionalism that characterized the First Austrian Republic. This power-sharing arrangement extended far beyond cabinet positions, government institutions. Partisan officials were appointed throughout the public service to give approximately equal influence to both the Austrian People's Party, OVP, and the Social Democratic Party, SPO. State-owned industries. In 1949, propors was expanded to include the senior management of nationalized industry. Media, the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, ORFF, was divided between the parties, with the OVP controlling radio and the SPO television. State governments, most federal states had propors written into their constitutions, automatically entitling parties to cabinet positions based on their electoral performance. The system reached its peak during the Grand Coalition governments between 1945 and 1966, but its influence continued well beyond this period. While criticized for fostering patronage and complacency, propors contributed significantly to Austria's political stability during the crucial Reconstruction period. Social partnership, cooperation for economic growth. Complementing the propors system was Austria's unique social partnership, Sozialpartnerschaft, a formalized cooperation between employer associations, trade unions, and government. According to the Austrian Embassy Archive, the common definition for this type of cooperation is social partnership. This system involved four key institutions: the Chamber of Labor, dominated by the SPO, the Austrian Trade Union Federation, SPO-aligned, the Austrian Economic Chamber, OVP-aligned, the Chamber of Agriculture, OVP-aligned. The social partnership was particularly influential in wage negotiations, preventing labor disputes through coordinated bargaining price controls, moderating inflation through voluntary agreements, economic planning, coordinating investment and industrial policy, social policy, developing welfare state provisions through consensus. As the Austrian Embassy Archive notes, in the political decision-making process, a balance of interests can still be achieved, creating a system that fostered economic stability and social peace. This cooperation was especially important during the economic boom years of the 1950s and 1960s, when considerable economic growth and rise in employment and wages created a favorable basis for the exchange of economic and socio-political interests. The Austrian Wirtschaftswunder, economic miracle. Building on the foundations of Marshall Plan aid and the stability provided by the political and social partnership systems, Austria experienced remarkable economic growth from the mid-1950s through the 1970s. This Wirtschaftswunder transformed Austria from a war-torn nation into one of Europe's most prosperous societies. Key elements of Austria's economic success included strategic nationalization. Key industries like steel, energy, and banking remained under state control, allowing for coordinated investment and development. Export orientation. Austria benefited from its proximity to the booming West German economy, developing strong export industries. Tourism expansion. Austria leveraged its natural beauty and cultural heritage to develop a thriving tourism sector. Infrastructure investment. Significant public investment in transportation, energy, and telecommunications created the foundation for industrial growth. Skilled workforce. Austria's dual education system, combining academic education with vocational training, produced a highly skilled workforce. The economic success continued even during global economic challenges. As noted in the New Left Review article, while 1980 was a year of zero economic growth for the OECD nations, Austria was forecast to show an increase of 2.5% in GNP, while unemployment stands at 2.3%. Political evolution, from Grand Coalition to single-party government. The political landscape evolved significantly during this period. Grand Coalition era, 1955 to 1966, the OVP and SPO governed together, implementing the Propor system throughout public institutions. Crisis of the Propor system. By the late 1950s, the system showed signs of strain. OVP single-party government, 1966-1970. After winning an absolute majority, the OVP formed Austria's first single-party government of the Second Republic under Chancellor Joseph Klaus. SPO era under Bruno Kreisky, 1970 to 1983. The SPO won its first parliamentary majority in 1970 and strengthened its position in successive elections. Under Kreisky's leadership, Austria maintained economic growth even during global recessions. The transition from coalition to single-party governments did not fundamentally alter Austria's consensus-oriented approach. Even when governing alone, both the OVP and SPO maintained dialogue with opposition parties and social partners on major economic and social policies, legacy and transformation. The Austrian model of consensus politics and social partnership began to evolve in the 1980s due to several factors. Economic challenges, reduced growth rates, and rising budget deficits put pressure on the system. Political changes, the rise of new parties like the Greens and the strengthening of the Freedom Party, FPO, challenged the two-party dominance. Globalization, increased international competition limited the effectiveness of national economic planning. EU membership. Austria's 1995 accession to the European Union shifted decision-making in many areas to the European level. As the Austrian Embassy Archive notes, since the 1980s, economic, social, and political changes have become apparent in Austria, too. It has not only become more difficult for the federations to align the different interests of their members to a common denominator. Reduced turnout in elections to the chambers and the general calling into question of compulsory membership are symptoms of change. Nevertheless, the legacy of this period remains significant. The institutions and practices developed during Austria's post-war decades created a distinctive political culture that continues to influence Austrian governance, emphasizing consensus building, social dialogue, and pragmatic problem-solving over ideological confrontation. The rise of Bruno Kreisky and SPO governance. The period from 1970 to 1983 marked a transformative era in Austrian history under the leadership of Chancellor Bruno Kreisky. After winning the 1970 election, Kreisky's Social Democratic Party, SPO, formed a minority government, and in 1971 secured an absolute majority that would be maintained through subsequent elections in 1975 and 1979. Kreisky's 13-year tenure was the longest of any chancellor in Republican Austria. Born in 1911 to a Jewish family in Vienna, Kreisky had joined the socialist movement as a teenager. His political career was interrupted by imprisonment under the Austro-fascist regime and later exiled to Sweden during the Nazi period. This background shaped his commitment to democratic values and social reform. The Kreisky era was characterized by extensive social reforms that modernized Austrian society and expanded the welfare state. These reforms touched virtually every aspect of Austrian life. Kreisky's government implemented sweeping changes to Austria's education system, focusing on democratization and equal opportunity, abolition of university fees, making higher education accessible to all social classes, expansion of university access, opening up educational opportunities beyond traditional elites, student support, introduction of optional health insurance for students and expanded financial assistance, school reforms, free textbooks for students and subsidized school transportation. The government significantly expanded healthcare access through several key initiatives: preventive care, introduction of free medical checkups for healthy people, 1972. Hospital modernization, significant investment in healthcare facilities, health insurance expansion, extended coverage to previously excluded groups. Mother-Child Pass Program, established comprehensive prenatal and postnatal care. Kreisky's administration strengthened worker protections and improved working conditions, reduced working hours, cut the work week to 40 hours, increased vacation time, established 4 weeks of annual paid vacation wage protection. The Wage Continuation Act of 1974 guaranteed continued pay for workers in private enterprises during illness, expanded sick pay, extended full sick pay to blue-collar workers, 1974, protection against dismissal. In 1979, restrictions on redundancy and dismissal of employees were implemented. Special provisions for night shift workers. The Night Shift Heavy Manual Work Act of 1981 introduced preventive health care and early retirement options for those in physically demanding jobs. Under Justice Minister Christian Broda, the government pursued significant legal reforms, penal code reform, modernization of Austria's criminal justice system, decriminalization of abortion under certain conditions reflecting changing social attitudes, decriminalization of homosexuality, removing discriminatory laws, family law reform, modernizing marriage and divorce regulations, minority rights, established language rights for Slovenia and Croatian minorities. The government expanded Social Security coverage and family benefits. Pension reforms, periods of study, illness, and unemployment were made pensionable widows' pensions, indexed to maintain their value, 1970. Family benefits, expanded to include marriage payments, 1972, school book subsidies, 1974, and birth payments, 1976. Self-employed coverage, introduction of Social Security coverage for the self-employed. While implementing these social reforms, Kreisky maintained economic stability through Keynesian economic policies, using government spending to stimulate growth and maintain employment, nationalized industries, strategic management of key state-owned enterprises, social partnership, continuing Austria's tradition of cooperation between employers, unions, and government. In foreign policy, Kreisky pursued what he called active neutrality, positioning Austria as a bridge between East and West during the Cold War. Austria's foreign policy under Kreisky emphasized its neutrality and its role as a bridge between East and West during the Cold War. His international achievements included establishing Vienna as the Third World Headquarters of the United Nations in 1979, improving relations with Eastern European countries while maintaining ties with the West, pioneering diplomatic initiatives in the Middle East, including controversial meetings with PLO leader Yasser Arafat. The Kreisky era is widely regarded as a period of significant social progress and modernization. His government's reforms created a more equitable society while maintaining economic prosperity. Kreisky was credited with successfully pursuing a policy of active neutrality. The social democratic model implemented under Kreisky demonstrated that progressive social policies could coexist with economic growth. His government's ability to navigate the economic challenges of the 1970s, including the 1973 oil crisis, while maintaining social programs was particularly notable. When Kreisky resigned in 1983 after his party lost its absolute majority, he left behind a transformed Austria with expanded social services, modernized legal frameworks, and enhanced international standing. The institutions and reforms established during his chancellorship continue to shape Austrian society today, and his approach to governance, combining pragmatism with progressive ideals, remains influential in European social democratic thought, European integration, and neutrality's evolution. Austria's accession to the European Union in 1995 marked a watershed moment in the country's post-Cold War development. With the collapse of the Soviet bloc, Austria's constitutional neutrality, once a cornerstone of its foreign policy, required reinterpretation. As noted in research from the University of Michigan, despite declaring its neutrality in 1955, Austria exploited every possible link to the West with the exception of NATO membership. As soon as the East-West conflict ended, Austria applied for EU membership and became a member in 1995. The decision to join the EU followed a decisive referendum in June 1994 with 66% voting in favor. This integration fundamentally altered Austria's economic and political landscape, leading to deeper integration into the European single market, adoption of the euro in 1999, with cash introduction in 2002, participation in EU political structures and decision-making, a recalibration of Austria's neutrality within the context of EU membership. While maintaining formal neutrality and remaining outside NATO, Austria joined the Partnership for Peace program and participates in the EU's common foreign and security policy. This has created an ongoing tension between traditional neutrality and European solidarity that continues to shape Austrian foreign policy debates, the Freedom Party's transformation. The 1990s witnessed a significant political realignment with the dramatic rise of the Freedom Party, FPO, under Jörg Haider's leadership. As Ebrary.net explains, Haider transformed the Freedom Party into a right-wing populist party, fulfilling all the criteria mentioned as characteristics of a populist movement. Haider's FPO capitalized on anti-establishment sentiment, concerns about immigration criticism of the traditional OVP-SPO Grand Coalition and Propor system. This strategy proved successful, with the party securing 26.9% of the vote in the 1999 elections, becoming the second-largest party in Austria, the 2000 coalition crisis. In February 2000, the formation of a coalition government between the Conservative People's Party, OVP, and the FPO triggered an unprecedented diplomatic crisis. The EU's 14 other member states imposed diplomatic sanctions against Austria, the first such action against a member state. The unwritten consensus since the Second World War has been that far-right parties do not enter European governments. When the OVP-FPO government was formed in 2000 in Austria, the EU did not have the political tools to deal with it properly. The sanctions were eventually lifted after a panel of wise men evaluated the situation, but the episode led to the creation of Article 7 in the Nice Treaty, sometimes called the Austria Article, establishing a mechanism to address serious breaches of EU values by member states. Sebastian Kurz's meteoric rise and fall exemplifies the increased political volatility of contemporary Austria. At just 31, Kurz became Europe's youngest head of government when he formed his first coalition with the FPO in December 2017. However, this coalition collapsed dramatically in May 2019 due to the Ibiza affair, a political scandal involving then Vice-Chancellor Heinz-Christian Strache of the FPO. The scandal was triggered on 17 May 2019 by the publication of a secretly recorded video, which shows then opposition politicians Strache and Gudenas discussing their party's underhanded practices and intentions. The video showed Strache appearing receptive to proposals from a woman posing as a Russian oligarch's niece, discussing providing the FPO with positive news coverage in return for government contracts. The fallout was immediate. Strache and Gudenas resigned from all political positions. The coalition government collapsed. Chancellor Kurz called for early elections. Parliament passed a no-confidence vote against Kurz on May 27, 2019. A caretaker government was appointed until elections in September 2019. Kurz returned to power in January 2020, forming an unprecedented coalition with the Green Party. However, his political career ended in October 2021 amid another corruption scandal. As the Financial Times reported, police raided ministries across Vienna, revealing the existence of a probe by Austrian state prosecutors into grand corruption at the heart of government. Kurz is its central suspect. The allegations involved using taxpayers' money to bribe media organizations for favorable coverage that helped propel Kurz to power. Though Kurz resigned as chancellor, he initially remained party leader and parliamentary group chairman, before eventually withdrawing from politics entirely. The political turbulence of recent decades has transformed Austria's once stable political system. Fragmentation of the party system. The traditional dominance of the OVP and SPO has given way to a more diverse political landscape, including the FPO, Greens, and liberal NEOS. Novel coalition formulas. The OVP Green coalition represented a significant departure from traditional patterns, bringing together conservative and progressive forces. Persistent polarization. Debates on immigration, national identity, and Austria's role in Europe continue to divide Austrian society. Ongoing corruption concerns. The scandals surrounding the Kurz government have raised questions about institutional integrity and political ethics. Contemporary Austria faces several key challenges: balancing neutrality with European integration. Reconciling Austria's constitutional neutrality with EU membership remains complex, particularly regarding security and defense policy. Managing immigration and integration. The refugee crisis of 2015 intensified debates about immigration policy and cultural integration. Economic competitiveness. Maintaining Austria's prosperity in a globalized economy while addressing issues of inequality and sustainability. Democratic resilience. Strengthening democratic institutions and public trust in the wake of political scandals. Despite these challenges, Austria remains one of Europe's most prosperous countries, with a high standard of living, strong social welfare systems, and a vibrant cultural life. The country continues to navigate the tensions between tradition and modernity, national identity and European integration, as it shapes its role in 21st century Europe.